Imagine going through all the trouble of having a baby. You wait around 9 long months till it finally pops out and then boom, ugly baby. There's many such cases. And sure, the ladies that want designer babies can just head down to the Burlington Sperm Factory, browse through the catalog and find their favorite flavor of 6'5", Dolph Lundgren, Diesel, Giga Chad, and have their uterus feast on elite baby batter so that they can pop out the next phase of human evolution. But if you're a guy, you might be thinking that your options for having a non-garbage test tube baby are kinda limited. Well, you'd be wrong. What if I told you that there actually was some mail-order eugenics for the fellas? A man named Ron Harris has you covered with his website where you can browse through images of supermodels and, if you so choose, for a reasonable fee, receive their eggs for you to nut on. I mean, alright, I guess I'm oversimplifying the science a bit. It's not like she's the Little Mermaid. Because the Little Mermaid you would hook up by jizzing on her eggs. Sorry to ruin your fantasy, but she's a fish and that's just how it works. So for today's episode of Tales from the Internet, let's take a look at Ron's Angels. This video is sponsored by the Beard Club. Having a great looking beard and mustache can take a lot of effort, and that's where the Beard Club comes in. These guys are the real deal when it comes to men's grooming. Whether it's beard cleaning, styling products, or a top-of-the-line trimmer, they've got everything you need to step up your beard game. Your facial hair is different from your head hair, and that's where Beard Club's beard shampoo comes in. It's formulated to clean your facial hair without drying out your skin and stripping it of its natural oils. You've also got the texturizing sea spray, which can add volume to your facial hair as well as your head hair. And it doesn't get that nasty product accumulation that a lot of volumizing hair things do. And of course, there's also the PT45 trimmer. It's sturdy, has multiple guards and settings, 45 in total, and an extremely long battery life. So it doesn't die in the middle of it and you wind up with a half-trimmed beard. So if you're looking to take your grooming game to the next level, go to thebeardclub.com/wang and take their beard quiz. They'll recommend a personalized kit that's tailored to your beard's needs. And don't forget to use my code WANG at checkout for 15% off your order. That's thebeardclub.com/wang. Use code WANG for 15% off. By the time 1999 came around, photographer Ron Harris had seen it all. A storied career of working with some of the most beautiful women around the world. In both still photography and, perhaps most famously, the 80s erotic workout video Aerobicize, which gained popularity with its airings on Showtime and left many Gen Xers with some of their most cherished formative memories. The unfortunate thing about models, though, in the rare case where they're actually getting paid, it's often not enough to make ends meet. They didn't have OnlyFans back in those days. And that's when Ron came up with the brilliant idea. You see, beautiful women have beautiful babies. And these models aren't planning on getting pregnant anytime soon. So why not sell their eggs? Ron sets up an auction website for it, takes a cut of the profits, and everybody wins. Thus, the website Ron's Angels is born. Welcome to ronsangels.com, the only website that provides you with the unique opportunity to bid on eggs from beautiful, healthy, and intelligent women. That's right, on ronsangels.com, with starting bids ranging between $15,000 and $150,000, you too can bid on your very own supermodel eggs. Each model had a page with a profile including a photo of their statistics such as age, blood type, and height, their parents' ages, race, and why they were doing this. Some of your lovely egg donor options included Model 117, a 25-year-old student who is selling her eggs to afford college and facilitate her acting career. She has a 3.0 grade average and loves animals. Model 88, a 20-year-old Romanian model selling her eggs so she can move to the USA. Model number 10, a 29-year-old pop artist selling her eggs to facilitate her career in pop art. Buyer beware though, her breasts are not real. At some point, Ron also expanded the business to include a sperm donor. Model 89, aka Perfect Health Heterosexual Businessman. And if you felt like your goods were up to snuff, you could take a picture, send over some basic information, and apply to be a donor for Ron yourself. It's the kind of thing that sounds like it's probably illegal, but you're kinda not sure, and it's also the early days of the internet, so you're never really sure about anything when it comes to legality. At that time, basically everything is uncharted territory. But just to keep things safe, Ron made sure to indicate in the disclaimer on his website that this was merely a venue for the sale, and not a place where actual medical procedures were being facilitated. You're not just gonna get an envelope full of eggs in the mail from Ron. The site gets a ton of attention really quickly just for being such an absurd, outrageous concept. Over 5 million views in the first week. And then on October 23rd of 1999, a journalist for the New York Times named Carrie Goldberg blows the lid off the whole operation. On web, models auction their eggs to bidders for beautiful children. The topics of high fees for egg donations was already a bit of a hot topic at this time. There had only just recently been a controversy where college newspapers were filled with ads soliciting egg donations for $50,000. In the article, she talks about the disgust this website caused among fertility specialists. Mr. Harris's melding of Darwin-based eugenics, Playboy-style sensibilities, and eBay-type commerce struck some infertility specialists as the most worrying sign yet of where the partly unregulated field of assisted reproduction may be going. Shelley Smith, director of the Egg Donor Program, a center in Los Angeles, said, "It's frightening and horrible. And the worst part for me is to think there might be something worse still beyond our imagination. It seems to escalate, and ever since the internet, it seems to snowball more rapidly. The depersonalization of people and selling of eggs." Carrie Goldberg also spoke to Ron Harris himself, who defended his website, saying that the criticisms were basically just a case of political correctness run amok. The way he puts it, since all women are not the same, the cost of their eggs should be based on their perceived value. The article continues the discussion with experts based on the ethics of the situation as well as the usual protocol for this sort of thing. They note that typically an egg donor would be selected based on her traits and then paid between $2,500 and $5,000 to cover her time and discomfort. And other doctors noted that when it comes to this, people aren't necessarily guaranteed to get what they're paying for. Intelligent parents aren't necessarily going to have intelligent children. And good-looking parents aren't necessarily going to have good-looking children. Can you imagine paying $150,000 for supermodel babies and then they just pop out on their uggos? Or even worse, can you imagine being the disappointingly ugly baby? Kinda awkward. As more outlets picked up on the story though, suspicion started to arise that this was a hoax. In part due to the fact that clicking around on the website would eventually lead you to Ron's porn site. A porn site that included pictures of several of the models that were supposedly selling their eggs. And with that in mind, I can't help but wonder if this was originally conceived as some kind of a fetish thing. A lot of how the site is made reminds me a bit of those cannibal roleplay sites that I came across in the Armin Maivis video. The profiles with all of the statistics of the women and the application process. Perhaps there are people who got off to the idea of selling their eggs to the highest bidder. In any case, people monitoring this website also noticed that none of these bids ever seemed to go up. Although as the site continued to receive negative attention, several of the models asked to be removed from it. So really, what was the deal here? A few people raised the idea that this website was merely a publicity stunt to drive traffic to his actual business, the porn site. And indeed, it turned out that Ron Harris did have a history of trying all different ways to promote his various porn sites. Although it was typically less imaginative stuff like spamming news groups until his sites got put into spam blockers. And when you look into the story, pretty much anywhere you look will declare that it is a hoax, but Ron himself never conceded this. To the very end, he maintained that this was a legitimate auction site. And he also said that his experience as a photographer uniquely qualified him for this line of work. What are my credentials, Harris boasts? I am a renowned fashion photographer and director for 40 years. And in case you doubted his past experience, he adds, I have been an Arabian horse breeder. He also declared that due to his specialized knowledge on this topic, he had spent the last 20 years working on a book that would detail his theories of genetics. Unfortunately, the book never came out. Two of the models that worked on the site also spoke to reporters and claimed that yes, it was real. One said that she wanted the money for college, and another said that she wanted it so she wouldn't be dependent on men. In response to his website, the American Society for Reproductive Medicine even published a report on the commodification of human egg donations. In the report, the ASRM urges that such high fees should not be paid for eggs, as it might cause women to discount the small but real health effects. It also urges against paying more for specific traits, referring to the practice as positive eugenics. So what do I think? Was it a hoax? Kind of. What I think happened is that Ron probably heard about the college newspaper scandal, the one where people were selling eggs for $50,000, and it got the gears turning a little bit. Knowing what a controversy this stirred up, he saw the opportunity for publicity, and it worked. I doubt that any actual sales were made through this website. But that being said, hypothetically, if a serious buyer were to come through this website and attempt to buy these eggs, I think he would have done it. Considering that it wasn't illegal and the plan was always to have the separate medical arrangements made off the website, why the fuck wouldn't he do it? But that being said, I also can't help but think that on some level, Ron was trying to make a point through satire on his website. You look at some of the things he wrote on there and it's just dripping with it. Beauty is its own reward. This is the first society to truly comprehend how important beautiful genes are to our evolution. Just watch television and you will see that we are only interested in looking at beautiful people. From the network anchors to supermodels that appear in most advertisements, our society is obsessed with youth and beauty. As our society grows older, we inevitably look to youth and beauty. The billion-dollar cosmetic industry, including cosmetic surgery, is proof of our obsession with beauty. It is not our intention to suggest that we make a super society of only beautiful people. This site simply mirrors our current society, in that beauty usually goes to the highest bidder. And my belief that Ron was engaging in social commentary with this website is furthered by a statement that he made in an interview with an old porn website, 4porn.net. In 1981, Ron operated a photo studio in La Brea Boulevard. After taking aerobics classes to stay in shape, he created TV's first aerobics exercise program, Aerobicize. It premiered on Showtime, 7/4/81. There are all these beautiful girls on a rotating turntable that turned all the boys on. People magazine called me the king of jiggle. Is this man trying to turn the country on or get the country in shape? A couple of people called me the father of erotica. I never came to terms with the erotica part. I would not go into pornography. In my head, I am not a pornographer. I'm an artist. I have no doubt in my mind that a man like this, a pornographer that fancies himself an artist, might have been attempting to criticize our society's obsession with beauty by taking it to an extreme end, much in the way that Jonathan Swift attempted to criticize the treatment of the poor by suggesting cannibalism. Or maybe it was just a porn site. In any case, Ron Harris passed away in 2017, so I guess we'll never know for sure. But anyway, that's the story of Ron's Angel. In November of 2016, a Tumblr user named Cummy Eyelids received a package from a woman she met on the site. When she opened the package, she found that inside of it was a jar, and inside of the jar, there was a severed human toe. But this was a good thing. You see, Cummy Eyelids had been expecting this toe. Cummy Eyelids had very special plans for this toe, a project the likes of which she had never attempted before. Ladies and gentlemen, this is the tale of the Tumblr toe necklace. From the moment it surfaced, the Tumblr toe necklace post was destined to become one of Tumblr's most infamous of all time. It pretty much instantly gave people flashbacks to the stolen human bones incident which had happened a year prior. The initial post was made by user Cummy Eyelids, aka Lana, it's anal backwards, from Dabachusetts. A few days ago, I received a very special package I the mail. It contained this amputated human toe, belonging to the lovely Royally Oily. Like, literally, this is a toe off of her foot. I'll be changing the solution, putting it in a new pretty jar and potentially making it into a wearable pendant. Taking on this project is so super meaningful to me, more so than any other jewelry project I've taken on, including the engagement ring. I'm so appreciative of her trust in me, and I'm so excited to get to work on this. And as you can see from its appearance, this toe has definitely been sitting in that jar for a while. No longer fit for human consumption, but I mean probably still good enough for a nice piece of jewelry. And note that Lana wasn't just some random woman that got sent the toe for no particular reason. She had a store that sold handmade jewelry, as well as household items that often involved animal teeth and bones. But at this point, she had never actually done anything involving human body parts. The woman who sent this toe, Royally Oily aka Hale, was overjoyed. Literally brought tears to my eyes. I am so grateful and excited myself. Not only do I absolutely trust your artistic expertise, cummy eyelids, but I also feel my body part, yes, an actual piece of me, could not be in more capable hands. I know you will respect and care for my little piggy. I appreciate this more than you'll ever really know. And the next reply to her, of course, is what many were thinking. Hey guys, just a quick question. What the fuck is going on over here? And before they could clarify, this post spread all over Tumblr. Tumblr, where white hoes sending other white hoes their pinky toes. IDK about yeah, but I wish someone would have the love and dedication to send me a toe. Just saying. Pretty quickly, this post makes its way off of Tumblr. Facebook, Sunday Night Football, Twitter, Westworld was crazy, Tumblr, a girl cut off her toe and sent it to another girl to make a pendant. And as the story spreads further and further from its initial source, all different kinds of details get confused and added out of nowhere. A lot of people seem to assume this was some kind of sex thing or a romance thing. You even had AOL report that Lana was Hale's fiance. And others had assumed that Hale had just kind of chopped her toe off in the moment and mailed it to her like on some kind of Yakuza shit. A lot of these details were later clarified by Hale in a response to insider reporter Jacob Shamsian. Like for starters, why exactly is this toe not attached to your body? She explains that as a child she had a condition called brachymetatarsia. I'm not exactly sure how it's pronounced. I don't know if it's brachy like brack, or if it's breaky like my achy breaky metatarsia. In any case, this condition features one or more of your toe bones being abnormally short, causing it to sit on your foot like so. And in 2008, when Hale was 17, the condition was getting more painful and it was causing her a lot of skin infections. So, her doctor suggested just amputating it. Note that the jar says 2011 and not 2008, and that's apparently because that's when the preservative ectoplasm inside of it expired. 5 years before Lana received it in the mail. Although Lana didn't complain about it being stinky or anything like that, so I guess the fluids were still doing what they do. But why hold on to it for so long? I kept it because I keep all my teeth and hair. It seemed natural to keep my toe. I've known, intuitively since a young age, to keep my body parts. She explains that she wants to be cremated when she dies, although however her loved ones choose to dispose of her body, it's up to them, with one condition: they keep the body together. I just picture some kind of Castlevania 2 Simon's Quest type scenario, where her family members are going all across the world to retrieve her body parts and put them back together. But I mean, fair enough. I think that if I ever had a body part removed, I would want to do the same thing. From what I've heard, some of these doctors get real stingy about giving you your body parts back after they cut them off, and it's like, yo, I'm already giving you way too much money. There's no free lunches here. Give me my body parts back, doc. You want my toe? Pay me for it. But then, so you have the toe, why make it into jewelry? Above all, the most important thing for me is that it's preserved. It's hard to explain how much I love my toe. People are so caught up in it being weird that they've overlooked that it's a part of me. I actually get depressed sometimes just thinking about how it was a part of me and now it's not. I know that sounds insane, but whatever, it's just true. And she goes on to explain that she feels a sense of guilt for having removed it. In a way, she thought it helped her develop the thick skin that she has now as an adult. Having a fucked up toe shaped her personality in ways that she came to appreciate. An example that she gives is that her cousin was bullying her about the toe and called her stubby, and at some point locked her in a cabinet for hours at a time. Clearly something that would be a formative experience to a young mind. So she felt that by turning it into jewelry and keeping it on her all the time, it would kind of get rid of some of the guilt she felt for having removed it now. And I can kind of understand where she's coming from with this. I mean, if you have this deformity that it It shaped your personality in certain ways and made you the person that you are. And now as an adult, you're walking around with your personality being the way that it is because of this, but you've removed the source of it. In some way, it almost feels like kind of like a stolen valor type of thing. Even though these characteristics are coming from real experiences, not having the physical thing there might almost make them feel inauthentic. And in terms of her vision for the actual piece of jewelry, she wanted a big bulky piece with a gothic aesthetic and maybe some steampunk elements. Which, looking at Kami Eyelid's work, it's definitely a good choice for this type of jewelry. In fact, Hale had actually contacted other artists before this, but Kami Eyelid's was the first one to actually accept the job. Unfortunately, I can't seem to find how the necklace turned out. If I do come across it somehow, I'll keep you updated on it. In any case, after this post went viral, Kami Eyelids began to be approached by a lot more people about making more human body part jewelry. You got teeth, ribs, pieces of brain. It's not clear how any of these specific pieces turned up, although ultimately it does seem like she eventually would get into collecting and working with more human body parts. It was in January of 2018 that Kami Eyelids would go viral once again, this time for a pair of posts regarding real human skeletons. In one of them, she's simply posing with a real skull, handsome skull friend and I, and in another, one of her friends found a young female partial skeleton at a flea market and bought it for 30 bucks. The flea market claimed that this specimen was obtained from a university, but people were suspicious of the origins of these skeletons. Another fucking bone thief? So this post blows up, she's viral once again, with only a surprisingly few amount of people putting together that, wait, this is Kami Eyelids, the toe necklace girl. And the people disturbed by this go into a bunch of different factions. Like, you have the ones who are merely disgusted by the idea of buying a human skeleton at all. Why the fuck would you buy a child's skeleton, and for what fucking purpose? Because it's fucking cool as fuck. Others question the ethics of the sourcing. Honest opinion? You probably shouldn't keep her. A human body old enough to have been carelessly discarded from a university probably wasn't from a time when university cared if their anatomical specimens were obtained through ethical means. Whoever that girl was, she and her family quite possibly did not consent to her body being used after her death, and keeping her remains consequentially might not be the most morally sound thing to do. Honest opinion? We don't care. If you don't personally collect human remains, then your opinion is not relevant right now. Smiley face XO. People started digging through her history to see what other kinds of weird shit they could find to be upset by, and sure enough, they did find this. Vials of real human bone dust for only 7 bucks. I could just imagine some chick bringing this to a party and getting her vial of real human bone dust mixed up with her vial of cocaine. It's a good way to get an ancient curse in your sinuses. Ultimately though, after the second burst of virality, Kami Eyelids would delete the flea market post and people largely went on their own way. So where are they now? Kami Eyelid's store, Pastel Alien Shop, is still active, although, there's no human pieces for sale. There's a lot of cement statues and planters, crystal pieces, and a few that incorporate animal bones. Honestly, I think a lot of this stuff is actually cool as fuck. As for Royally Oily, the woman who sacrificed her toe for the jewelry, it appears that she deleted her Tumblr account and a few years later had her username taken by an account that appears to be a blog about babies that posts resources for women who are struggling to get pregnant. Stuff about doing yoga to get pregnant better. I don't know if it would be better or worse that the person who owns this pregnancy blog knows the history of that username. But anyway, that's the story of the Tumblr toe necklace. Imagine, if you will, being born with a wiener so small, you can't use it for anything other than peeing. And even when you do, you make a big mess all over yourself. Like your Johnson is just so small that it's medically relevant how small it is. I mean, I know this isn't a problem that any of my viewers have, but what if it just falls off one day as a result of, say, a rare blood infection? Oh yeah, that's a thing that happens. I know by now you're terrified of that happening to you because it can happen, but if it does happen, don't worry, all hope is not lost. Because you see, today, we can grow you a bigger, better schwanz. A bionic cyberpunk pecker. You'll be the envy of all your neighbors. The only catch is we gotta grow it for you on your forearm. And then, hope your arm dong doesn't get tied up in years of bureaucracy. So for today's episode, let's talk about the men with penises on their arms. In March of 2003, a story began to circulate about a Russian man who had a replacement penis grown on his arm. There are a lot of different formats and retellings, some of them referring to as just Sergey, some of them displaying a black and white photo of the arm penis, which I probably can't show you. There's a few variations, so here's one of the most copy-pasted versions of this story. Russian man grows penis on arm. Russian doctors have conducted an 11-hour operation to replace a patient's deformed penis with one grown on his forearm. The Moskovsky Kozmolets Daily reports. The 30-year-old Russian man, whose name was changed in the article to protect his privacy, had a defect from birth. His penis was crooked, 2.5 inches long, and lacked a scrotum, newspaper writes. The doctors had the penis removed and attached to the man's arm. Using his body tissue, it grew to 6.5 inches and was sewn back onto his groin. Silicone tubes were inserted into the organ to ensure an erection was possible. Doctors also created a scrotum from the patient's own skin and placed silicone testicles in it. A Moscow surgeon said the man will be able to have sex in a few months. He added, "Women will never suspect it is artificial." There's so much going on here that it immediately makes me think that this is just a bullshit story. It reminds me so much of when news outlets picked up those fake stories about the woman whose husband divorced her because she had ugly babies. Or the one about the Chinese guy eating babies. It's just got all the elements. You've got an unbelievable, sensational story about a man with an anonymous name who, therefore, can't be looked up. It's reported in a public that the English-speaking world, especially in 2003, does not have access to, and it takes place in a country that Americans are primed to believe is this world where all kinds of crazy, ridiculous things happen. And that closing line, "Women will never suspect it's artificial," that just sounds like something out of an AOL chain email. It just sounds fake. Nevertheless, a month later, the Telegraph would expand on this story, now with added reporting by Nick Holdsworth and Ruth Hetherington, complete with a diagram on how the procedure works. The piece credits the procedure to a professor named Mikhail Sokolschik, a then 13-year specialist in all things penis regrowth. You got penile reconstruction, you got surgical implants, you got gender reassignment. Professor Sokolschik can do it all. This procedure, however, was a risky new procedure, and if it went wrong, the guy would be left with no penis at all. Here's how it works. During Sergey's operation, the surgeons began by removing the tip of his penis, the most sensitive part, and grafting it to his left forearm, allowing cell and tissue material to be kept alive. Simultaneously, skin from his forearm was cut into 2 separate flaps, which were rolled up and stitched around the flexible tubular silicone implants to fashion a lengthened shaft. The shaft and tip were then joined as one, before they were removed from the forearm and sewn back onto the base of the man's groin. A section of skin from his thigh was then grafted onto his forearm to reduce visible scarring. Throughout the operation, doctors swiftly reattached severed veins, capillaries, and nerve endings to reduce the risk of sensory damage. The forearm skin, of course, is used because this skin right here is the most penis-like on your body. This right here is a pure cock meat. I'm gonna fly to Russia right now and have them make me a fucking gauntlet of dicks. Sergey had gotten in touch with this facility after he read another story about someone in Russia who had a similar procedure. Presumably, this was the story of a Russian boy named Malik who had his penis destroyed after pissing on an electric wire.
Before you let it flow, find a place to go, just don't whiz on the electric fence.
The doctor added that once the procedure is finished, Sergey will not be able to actually achieve an erection. Rather, he will be in what the doctors described as a semi-permanent state of arousal. Wow, he's just like me. Don't get it twisted though, it would be good enough to have sex with. He's not just gonna be like, shoving some limp spaghetti noodle dick in. He's good to go. At this point though, I still had my doubts that this story was real or that Professor Sokolschik was real. So I began to look more into him. And it turns out that in fact, a few years later, he would emerge once again in a similar story. This time providing services to a Russian soldier who had lost his legs and his penis in a hazing incident. Additionally, I managed to find a thread on a forum for people with small dicks who want to have big dicks. One of these users actually managed to get a hold of Dr. Sokolschik, who responded. The professor replied that unfortunately, this user was not eligible for the procedure as his dick was too big. Probably the only time this guy is ever gonna hear that. So anyway, fortunately for Sergey, the clinic put up the majority of the cost of this expensive procedure. Their hope was that the publicity from this case would help them market the procedure to similarly afflicted men in the future. More than a decade later, the United Kingdom suddenly has an uptick of men with dicks on their arms. It's unclear what, if any, these procedures have to Mikhail Sokolshik's work, as these procedures are a bit different from his, but they do have some similar concepts. Basically, you're still walking around with a dick on your arm, the most famous being the story of a man named Malcolm MacDonald, a man that the Scottish Sun refers to as Dickie Arm. So in the early 2010s, Malcolm had been dealing with an infection in his perineum that was spreading to other parts of his body. It spread to my fingers and toes and turned them black. When I saw my penis go black, I was beside myself. It was like a horror film. I was in a complete panic. I knew deep down it was gone and I was going to lose it. Then one day, it just dropped off onto the floor. Because I had been through the devastation of knowing I was going to lose it, I just picked it up and threw it in the bin. I went to the hospital and they said the best they could do for me was to roll the remaining stump up like a little sausage roll. It was heartbreaking. Devastated by his dick falling off, Malcolm falls into a deep depression and turns to alcohol. He's drinking every day and he's avoiding his family and friends as much as he possibly can. He spends 2 years like this until one day his GP informs him about a man known as the Penis Master. I swear to God I did not make that name up for this video. The Penis Master, aka Professor David Ralph. Like Professor Sokolshik, he was also an expert in rebuilding penises. At this point in time, Professor Ralph had recently been in the news after he created a penis from scratch for a man named Andrew Wardle. So Andrew Wardle, due to a rare birth defect, in addition to being born with his bladder outside of his body, was also born with no penis at all. And he lived like this his entire life until the age of 45. That was when David Ralph, the Penis Master, came into his life. In Andrew's case, however, the procedure was a little bit different. The penis was created from his forearm skin and his leg skin and kind of shaped into a penis-like shape, like a Play-Doh. Anything goes.
Anything goes with Play-Doh.
And they attached it directly where the penis ought to be. And he had a pump to inflate it manually when necessary. The surgery was a great success, and after 10 days of a constant painful erection, and 6 weeks of waiting, he finally got to use the penis that he described as being ridiculously big, and lost his virginity to his girlfriend at the age of 45. And then he collapsed and had to go back to the hospital where he was unconscious for 5 days. Thankfully though, this incident wasn't the result of damage from the sex or something wrong with the surgery, rather it was an unrelated issue with his gallbladder that he was able to get surgery for. And because he was born with normal testicles that were connected to the bionic penis, he could potentially still have children, so the future's looking pretty bright for Andrew Wardle. And he owes it all to Professor Ralph, the Penis Master. So if the Penis Master could perform magic for Andrew, why not Malcolm? In 2016, after learning of the Penis Master, Malcolm has a meeting with him and his team. They talk about making Malcolm his very own bionic penis, including a long discussion about how he wants his dick to look. It was what Malcolm referred to as having a designer penis. One that he actually reportedly asked for 2 more inches than the surgeons were planning on giving him. But this will be a bit different from Andrew's. I imagine because, unlike Andrew, he did have some actual penile tissue to work with. So they make him the whole forearm and leg meat Play-Doh dick as before. But in this case, like the Russian procedures, they attach it to his forearm to grow out into a proper dick. But it's gonna have to stay there for 2 years. But at that point, you're willing to do anything, so he's game for it, and it all comes together pretty quickly. The NHS agrees to fund the procedure, and the surgical team jumps into action. Malcolm said, "When I saw it on my arm for the first time, I was so proud. After everything I had been through, it didn't feel weird at all. It was just a part of me. I was like any other man. I just couldn't leave it alone to begin with. I thought it was the best thing ever." He goes and he nicknames his arm Dick Jimmy. He's just going around pulling it out for laughs at bars and whatnot because, you know, what's a better party trick than having an actual fucking dick on your arm? Then 2018 rolls around, his dick is grown, and the doctors feel that it's time for the big leagues. Time to get moved from his arm to his crotch. Surgery date comes along and Malcolm's a little under the weather. So they reschedule the surgery, but then they have to reschedule it again, and again. It's almost 2 years of rigmarole, and then finally they get it together. Malcolm's in the hospital, wearing his hospital gown, ready to finally have his dick moved from his arm to his dick. He's ready to have his dick moved from his arm to his crotch. Then once again, there's some bad news. They have to postpone the surgery yet again due to a staff shortage. This happens in December of 2019. After December 2019, 2020 comes along. You know what that means? COVID-19. If they were short-staffed before COVID-19, I think that dick is staying on that arm for a very long time. That being said, a spokesperson for the hospital does place some of the blame for the delays on Malcolm. Unfortunately, there were delays before lockdown because Mr. McDonald missed or canceled some appointments. We offered him 4 dates for surgery, one of which we had to postpone by a week, but the other occasions he canceled or did not attend. Now, I don't know the exact situation that happened to him on these days. I mean, sometimes life just gets in the way. But I can't help but feel that if you've been walking around for 2 years with an abnormally big dick on your arm, a bionic penis with a cash value of 50,000 British pounds, and you finally have an appointment to get that dick moved to your crotch so you can finally use a dick for the first time in almost a decade, you just find a way to make it work. People have moved mountains to make shit work for much less than this. It's a little important. So thinking about that on some level, I can't help but feel that maybe he likes having a dick on his arm. I mean, who could blame him? That does sound kind of fun. So as far as I can tell, as of me making this video, Malcolm does still have a dick on his arm. In any case, I hope it all goes well for him when he eventually does have his procedure, and I hope he puts those extra 2 inches to good use. The man with a wiener on his arm finally had it moved to his crotch. Allow me to explain. Last year, I covered the story of a man whose sausage fell off due to a blood infection. Doctors made him a new one with his own skin and grew it on his arm. The problem is, he was stuck with it on his arm for 6 years due to scheduling issues and eventually the pandemic tying up the hospitals. Well, after a 9-hour surgical procedure, it's finally where it's supposed to be, and it's working. Enjoy, sir. I gotta be honest here, I've never really been into butt stuff. Sorry to disappoint, I never got the appeal. Like, I don't care how hot you are, how clean you claim to be. It's not like you're sterilizing your ass with fire. There's no way you're squeezing your turd cutter into an autoclave, so we just cannot reach the requisite level of cleanliness. I'm like the opposite of Messy Tails, you just gotta keep me away from any possible poop-adjacent surface. And then, a few years ago, it seemed like everybody on the internet got memed into eating ass. Not me, though. And after this story, I think you might reconsider. Today's Tales from the Internet. The legend of the threadworm butt plug. I don't know what it is, it just seems like, for some reason, a disproportionate amount of people on Reddit have worms in their ass. Like, you find one story about a Redditor with ass worms, and suddenly it just begets a parade of more Redditors coming to share their ass worm stories. One itchy asshole leads to another itchy asshole. Although previously this was an issue that I mainly just associated with Ralph Wiggum.
And when the doctor said I didn't have worms anymore, that was the happiest day of my life.
Thank you, Ralph. Very graphic.
So I guess it makes sense. One that stands out to me a lot, of course, is the threadworm butt plug story. In September of 2014 on r/sex, a post was made by a user named Wormy McBumbum. Obviously a throwaway account for this post, although throughout the years he did use the account a small handful of times to comment on things like motivational wallpapers, a haunted baby, and an AMA by then UK Labour Party Prime Minister candidate Duncan Enright. But this was primarily an assworm-centric account, so he makes a post on r/sex to tell us the story of an encounter he once had with an old fling. It was a very special night. It was a butt stuff night. He details how him and his fuck buddy took a moment to get really clean first, knowing where things were headed. Can't have a dirty asshole, can we? And then it's time to jump into the action. My fuck buddy and I were getting down to it. We both love anal and toys and all things filthy. So, I had been merrily eating out her butt for some time, and something tickled the end of my tongue. Must be a bit of tissue paper, I thought, so I swept it out with my finger. Yep, white, must be tissue paper. Tissue paper, of course, because of this thorough, deep cleaning that had occurred. With that being said, you would hope that a thorough cleaning in preparation for, eating the ass, like ice cream, the orifice that shit comes out of, it would be so thorough as to eliminate any sort of debris, tissue paper or otherwise. Some commenters expressed the same sentiment, to which I replied, no poo-poo. But I digress, you see where this is going. Popped in a butt plug and commenced merrily fucking. You ever see the Coke and Mentos challenge? Picture that, but with an ass full of worms. Then, the plug came out. I thought it would be fun to tie her up, so hands to ankles, ass in the air. Ready for a good old-fashioned ass fucking. A little white thing pops out to say hello, closely followed by another. Two wriggling pals, tickling her chalky starfish with their hypnotic dance. It's kind of like that scene in The Gate where they move the tree out of the way and it opens up the gate to hell. He didn't provide any pictures, of course, so I've taken it upon myself to provide a visual aid. You're welcome. I promptly lose my erection as I realize these are parasitic worms and I probably had one in my mouth. That wasn't tissue paper after all. I sweep them away. Plug goes back in. Don't want any more of them slipping out. I turn her over and fuck her conventionally. Dump load and go to sleep, feeling all kinds of dirty. Just crawl out of her ass, just fucking recorked it. It's like when you go over somebody's house, break something you don't want to know about it, so you kind of half-assed put it back together and put it behind something and just hope that somebody else deals with it later. Although granted, they're still sleeping in the bed full of the worms that, if you remember, he just swept them off, so they're crawling around in bed with them. And why post this on Reddit at all? Because he wanted advice on how to tell her that she's infested. Not so much advice given though as it is just people being like, hey, you gotta tell her, man, you're being kind of an asshole. To which he responds by basically saying, come on guys, it's not like it's AIDS or something, just a couple worms. It's also advised that she's gonna need medicine and he's gonna need medicine as well in case he swallowed one of them. But don't worry, he's all covered. Yeah, I feel like a jerk now for not telling her, especially as I took mebendazole. Mebendazole being the drug you take to kill the worms. So not only did he not tell her, he's holding out on the medicine, and if he eats that ass again, he's just gonna reinfect himself. I know it's horrible, but not particularly dangerous. Kinda assume she must know. To which another now deleted Redditor responded, no, she doesn't know. You think she likes them or something? Funny thing about that, it's not entirely unheard of, especially not on Reddit. Let's take a trip back to 2011 now. Yet another reply thread with Redditors talking about the worms in their asses. This one in a post entitled, What's the Dirtiest Secret You've Promised to Keep? Mr. Twizzle writes, my GF at the time had been Googling white worms coming out my vagina on my laptop. I called her out on it at the same time I called her out on fucking one of my friends behind my back. I promised not to tell anyone. I told everybody. Now, I know it probably felt good to get that kind of comeuppance on someone who cheated on you, but you're not exactly doing yourself any favors. I mean, if your girlfriend had a worm pussy, and you've been fucking the worm pussy, that just tells everyone that you've got a worm pussy dick. Dudes posting their L's at the bar. A few replies down though, someone else doesn't feel as negatively about them. Trouser Demon. Yes, it's called threadworm. I had them in my ass for years. Partly I was too lazy to get rid of them, partly they don't really cause any problems other than being itchy sometimes. And I liked the idea that I was keeping another living creature alive.
I took good care of her.
In the end though, I just took the pill that kills them. The itching got too damn annoying, and I stopped caring about the welfare of tiny, blind, parasitic worms. So you developed paternal feelings for the worms in your ass? I guess I just like the idea of something that utterly depended on my whims for the right to exist. There was a power to it, and the tenderness a god king has for his subjects. Well, most people have kids to get that feeling, but I guess worms in your ass works too. A lot less expensive than having kids too, especially if you leave them untreated. So with that in mind, I know what you're thinking. Why should asses and vaginas have all the fun? Can I get worms in my pee hole? OP mentioned that they were in his girlfriend's vagina. I was wondering if there is/would be any way to encourage the worms to live inside a male urethra. Also, where could one get some of these eggs?
I don't like where this is going.
Do you have to ingest them, or would it be better to put them where you want to go, i.e. insert them directly into your urethra/anus/etc.? Because of this comment, I tried to see if you could possibly buy pinworm eggs online, but I'm just finding African nightcrawlers and shit like that. No way you're fitting an African nightcrawler in your pee hole. Actually, what am I saying? We've all seen Kids in the Sandbox. The nightcrawler is nothing. In any case, it's not like there's a scarcity of ass worms going around, so what happens once you have your supply situated? Your intentions are no doubt creepy as fucking hell, but here we go. Pinworms can travel into the vagina because of its closeness and similarity to the anus. You hear that, ladies? Don't get all high and mighty on me. Your vagina is close enough to an asshole that a worm can't tell the difference. Although apparently they do die in there because there's nothing for them to eat. Ideally. They just want to eat poop. A male urethra is not similar enough to the anus for them to travel there by their own accord. So yeah, sorry to crush your dreams here, but there's probably not a way to infest your urethra with worms. Although now that I've said that, there's probably at least one of you that's going to take that as a challenge. And now, having watched this video, I imagine that there's maybe some of you that are getting a little paranoid. Maybe all of a sudden you start to feel a little itch that you didn't notice before. Maybe there's an itch you did notice before, now it's getting worse. What are the odds that you have worms? As it turns out, at any given time, something like 14% of the entire US population are infested with ass worms. And it's estimated that throughout their lifetime, whether or not they realize it, nearly 100% of all people will have them in their lifetime. One day, a young Redditor found himself the victim of a horrible accident. An accident that rendered him incapacitated for an extremely long period of time, with both arms broken. This has a lot of obvious consequences. Can't feed yourself, can't play video games, can't wipe your own ass. But another thing that might not be immediately obvious, can't jerk off. This guy's a Redditor. He goes from popping off 2 loads a day to 0. And it affects his mood, so he lashes out at his family. Eventually, his parents figure out what's going on, and they come up with a solution. His mother jerks him off. Ladies and gentlemen, this is the Reddit broken arms story. Throughout the years, this has been one of the most requested stories for me to make a video on. The infamous Reddit broken arms story. Honestly, I've taken a crack at it a few times, and every time I just kind of hit this wall with it. Because it's just such an uncomfortable and frankly criminal story. I just never really know the right way to approach it, but this time I just said fuck it, I'm just gonna dive in head first. That being said, this is subject matter that for some people may be traumatic for various reasons. If that's you, don't keep watching this, and if you do keep watching it, don't say I didn't warn you. It begins on December 22nd of 2011, with a post by a Redditor named The Verified Son entitled, "I am a man who had a sexual relationship with his mother, probably NSFW. When I was in my teens, I had a sexual relationship with my mother. I think that we would both characterize the experience as positive. Please feel free to ask anything, but I will not discuss anything that would reveal my identity. Recently, my mom and I spoke with a researcher that is studying examples of incest that were not traumatic. He is preparing a paper on the subject. I am not an advocate for incest. For whatever reason, it worked for us. Don't use my experience as a template. I am here to relate my experience, not debate incest as a subject." So I really hope I don't need to say this, but as the poster said, do not use his experience as a template. And of course, Reddit is famous for people just, coming in and telling tall tales that are just totally made up. So you would need some kind of proof for this, and according to a mod, he verified it. Which leads to the question, how does one verify such a thing? Verification took about a month of going back and forth with a researcher that verified both my mom's and my identity for his research. He reached out to the mods and verified with them. It was also verified that he is who he says he is, and that his field of practice is child psychology and sexual research. So this whole AMA had actually been in the work for a month, not to mention all of the time that this Redditor and his mom spent with the researcher. And according to the mod, the most difficult part of the process was simply getting the researcher to understand what Reddit actually is. Obviously, the thread begins with a whole bunch of people joking about it. Did she ever ask you while you were doing it? Remember when I could fit all of you inside me? This comment has made me laugh hardest so far. I'm reading this at work and trying to stifle my laughing. Hey, what's so funny? Oh, nothing, just reading about this dude who was fucking his mom. Do you smile every time someone calls you a motherfucker? Did you get confused when your dad asked you to seed the lawn during the summer? They also asked him to clarify that he wasn't adopted or, a stepson or anything like that. Nope, biological. So the obvious question, how does one wind up in this situation? It started with her masturbating me, progressed to her giving me oral, and eventually we had sex/made love. It was a slow progression. This was not a satisfactory answer for Reddit. I mean, this is not something that simply starts happening and slowly starts progressing. One thing does not lead to another here. So he gives some more details, and this post right here is where the story gets its name. Well, without giving away too info, I was injured in an accident at 14 and incapacitated. I went from masturbating 2 times a day to 0. After 2 weeks, I was frustrated and took it out on my parents. My mom and dad knew what was up and talked about my mom helping me masturbate. They approached me one afternoon, and when my mom said, "I know you are frustrated, and why you are frustrated, would you like some help masturbating?" Blood was rushing in my ears, and I said yes, but I really didn't know if she meant what I thought she meant. I was excited and confused. She said that she would take care of me when I went to bed, hours away. Now, right off the bat, my thought, and probably your thought too, is that this mother belongs in jail. Both parents really, because don't forget that the dad co-signed it. It's pretty cut and dry abuse, not just because of the age, but the power dynamic, and also the fact that incest itself is illegal in most jurisdictions. Like, there's several different crimes going on here. And as a lot of people in the thread pointed out, everyone's kind of like joking around about this, but if the genders were switched, if this was a father and a daughter, people would have a much different tone in approaching this. Like, this is why I kept on trashing this video, because people would ask me to cover this haha funny Reddit story, and I remembered it that way, and then I go back and look at it, and I'm like, oh, this is a lot darker than I remember. But still, what's done is done. OP is a lot older now. He's working with actual professionals, and he's just here to tell us about what happened. So he describes this interaction at first of being clinical in nature. Like, I'm just here performing this procedure for you for the sake of your mental health. Which, it's still not good, but it sounds less not good. And there is at least one guy on Reddit who is just fascinated by the description of this as clinical. Mr. Ogloblo, I read through your comments and I'm interested in how clinical she was initially in her handjobs. If I, for whatever reason, had to masturbate a male friend or family member of mine, I would try to make my technique as uniform and devoid of personality as possible. This is kinda dumb, but my own personal fantasy surrounding your situation is me wearing pajama pants or sweats, getting a large and obvious erect. Alright, we get the idea. You don't need to hear this guy's entire fantasy that he wrote out. I mean, this guy wrote a whole essay asking questions about the various amounts of personality she put into different things, the varying speeds and stuff like that. And side note, apparently this guy seemed to have like some kind of reputation for this, because the top comment is, "I just knew you would eventually show up." Actually, wait, I can't go on with this video without looking into some of this guy's greatest hits. In a thread about Bugs Bunny chewing a carrot, I've been trying to find a clip of a cute naked lady making the same nonchalant pose while chewing carrots while going, "What's up, doc?" Had a fantasy of getting randomly abducted by some guys in a van, and I'm terrified, and my eyes are darting around the room, and I see a CIA-looking guy pull out a needle and inject me, and I black out and wake up in a ditch near my house with 2 DVDs in my hand. Could be hot if one of those cute female hipsterish YouTube comedy duos used that footage to make an Animorphs parody with cheesy effects to turn them into koalas. This guy's account's deleted, but I might have to revisit him for another video in the future. What's less amusing though is how Verified Son described the escalation of things. Well, the first time we had intercourse, I was lying in bed getting oral from her. In the middle of it, she stopped, climbed up on my body, pulled her panties aside, and sat on me. She was wearing a long t-shirt. She told me not to come, and she rode me for about a minute and came. She then finished me with her mouth. My head was spinning. Sometimes it was discussed at the table, but not with my dad around. I would never tell anyone I know. With the revelation that oral was involved, Reddit lined up to ask the burning question. Did she swallow? And the answer was... yeah! And as one Redditor, Algor that's a hell of a name, pointed out, the thing that keeps people from doing incest normally is that we naturally just find the whole thing repulsive on a mental and physical level. And another user added that there's an evolutionary characteristic of our sense that makes people who are closely related to us just naturally unappealing in a sexual way. Verified Son responded by saying that he always found her attractive, even before this. Then someone asked if he was ever attracted to his sister, and he said yes, but not overly. And to that I have to wonder, say hypothetically, this woman one day puts these pieces together and figures out that this is her brother. Does she open up the thread, see that question, and think, what the fuck do you mean, not overly? And with the sister in the picture, people were curious about whether she ever came close to finding out. He said that there were no close calls, and the sister had left for college shortly after this began, making it easier for them to do all this. And a lot of people suggested that perhaps his father and his sister also had some kind of arrangement like this going on, but this is something that he flatly denied. In his words, they weren't wired that way. But the dad is a whole different kind of weirdo for being aware of this and signing off on it. In fact, in an edit to his original post, he mentions that his mother said that his dad had gotten kind of jealous about this. Which, I mean, you could have said no, don't do it. There's also questions about girlfriends. Had you already lost your virginity, or was your mother your first? I lost my handjob/blowjob virginity to my mom, but intercourse was with the GF.
Bullshit!
You liar!
You cheated on your GF with your mom. Is there something else? Please, Sarah, you know the only two women in my life are you and my mom. So where are we at with this situation now? Do you still continue this sexual relationship today? No, it ended after I left for college. It just started to slow down and then eventually stopped. There wasn't an event that ended it. I have talked to my mother and father about it over the years. The subject is not off limits. I don't think that either of us wishes it to start up again. Long-distance relationships can be tough. Now, in his original post, he also mentioned that he would update the thread with the research paper when it finally got published. To my knowledge, though, he never followed up by posting the research paper. Maybe there was something identifiable in it, although I don't know why they would have published that in a paper, or maybe it just never came to fruition. It's kinda tough to say because at some point in the past year or so he deleted his account, so it's just going by what's archived. I'm not exactly sure what inspired the deletion, but up until that point, he had remained active on Reddit for the past 10 years. A lot like how the Swamps of Dagobah guy or the Double Dick guy used to pop in every now and again when someone would reference them, he too would come in when someone made the Broken Arms reference. And he was also made an honorary mod of r/incest, which I naively thought might have been, some kind of support group for victims of incest, but no, it's people posting their fantasies. A lot of people would spread the rumor that he had started the subreddit, but the truth is he was just brought in as a mod and would clean up posts that broke the rules. I have to imagine that a lot of people watching this video who are already familiar with this post are kind of reacting to it the same way that I was when I was putting the video together. I don't know if it's just because of how the culture has changed or if it's because now, the last time I read this was 10 years ago, but I would just think of the story being, funny Reddit jerk-off story, broken arms, you broke your arms. Maybe it's because, making a meme of it for a decade made everyone kinda forget how fucked up the story is. But looking back on it, I am completely horrified by it. And you have to ask, why even share a story like this with Reddit? And this is what he had to say. I am new to Reddit and saw the guy with his sister. Apparently there was a thread about a guy and his sister that was popular around the time, but didn't blow up to the extent that this one did. I'm not sure if he turned out to be real, but either way, most of you were not assholes about it. It seemed like an easy way to inform and share. It's a bit cathartic to answer questions. So there you have it. Broken arms. Well, actually, wait, one last detail to this story. A detail that I think has escaped everyone for the past decade. You see, for years and years and years, this has been known as the broken arms story, right? But here's the thing, and he wound up reiterating this several times throughout the years. This guy never actually broke his arms. What he said was his injuries incapacitated him and made him lose use of his arm. It's a very subtle difference, but considering that we literally all call this the broken arm story, it's kind of an important difference. Maybe there's like a different Mandela Effect universe version of this where he did break his arms. In Star Wars Episode 5, The Empire Strikes Back, released in 1980, Luke Skywalker crash lands his X-Wing in the swamps of a strange, foggy planet, full of slimy green foliage and strange creatures. And it was on this planet, Dagobah, that the young Skywalker would meet his destiny, training with Master Yoda to meet his true potential as a Jedi. 32 years later on Reddit, 2012, the name Dagobah would take on a whole new meaning. But instead of a young Jedi tapping into the Force to unlock fantastic powers, a young operating room nurse tapped into a disgusting infected anus to unlock a lifetime of scars. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Swamps of Dagobah. The Swamps of Dagobah story is at this point probably the most requested story for me to cover in a video, and perhaps the most infamous Reddit story that I've yet to touch. It begins on August 4th, 2012, in a thread created by Squeeples entitled Doctors/Nurses/Redditors, the three most qualified types of medical professionals. What has been your most gory, disgusting, or worst medical experience? The thread was inspired by Squeeples' experience as a volunteer nursing assistant, the story that made them quit the profession. They described an elderly cancer patient whose skin had turned purple all over from ruptured blood vessels. And after 2 days where they constantly struggled to keep his pain under control with morphine, he finally passed away. Squeeple didn't have it in him to keep seeing such scenarios play out over and over again, yet they maintained a fascination with such stories. Thus, the thread. And it garnered all kinds of horrifying responses from the medical field. A child covered in cigarette burns that his parents swore was a skin condition. A bacterial meningitis patient whose face swelled up and turned purple as he cried blood. A car crash victim whose head came off in an EMT's hands. This entire thread is filled with scenarios that go beyond the wildest depths of your imagination. But above all, there's one story from this thread that's reached legendary status and has been shared over and over again forever on Reddit. The story was told in a comment by an operating room nurse named Bonsai Panda. For a long time, I've been trying to figure out the best way to present this story in a video, and frankly, every attempt to cut in some commentary or summarize it just didn't do it justice. You gotta just hear it all the way through. So with that being said, it's about a 10-minute read. Go get yourself a snack, maybe some Go-Gurt, and just let the story wash over you. But anyway, without further ado, I present to you The Swamps of Dagobah. OR nurse here. This is kind of a long one. I was taking a call one night and woke up at 2 in the morning for a general surgery call. Pretty vague, but at the time I lived in a town that had a large population of young military guys and avid meth users, so late night emergencies were common. Got to the hospital where a few more details awaited me. Perirectal abscess. For the uninitiated, this means that somewhere in the immediate vicinity of the asshole, there was a pocket of pus that needed draining. Needless to say, our entire crew was less than thrilled. I went down to the emergency room to transport the patient, and the only thing the ER nurse said as she handed me the chart was, "Have fun with this one." Amongst healthcare professionals, vague statements like that are a bad sign. My patient was a 314-pound Native American woman who barely fit on the stretcher I was transporting her on. She was rolling frantically side to side and moaning in pain, pulling at her clothes and muttering Hail Marys. I could barely get her name out of her after a few minutes of questioning, so after I confirmed her identity and what we were working on, I figured it was best just to get her to the anesthesiologist so we could knock her out and get this circus started. She continued her theatrics the entire 10-minute ride to the OR, nearly falling off the surgical table as we were trying to put her under anesthetic. We see patients like this a lot, though. Chronic drug abusers who don't handle pain well and who have used so many drugs that even increased levels of pain medication don't touch simply because of high tolerance levels. It should be noted Tonight's surgical team was not exactly wet behind the ears. I'd been working in healthcare for several years already, mostly psych and medical settings. I've watched an 88-year-old man tear a 1-inch diameter catheter balloon out of his penis while screaming, "You'll never make me talk." I've been attacked by an HIV-positive neo-Nazi. I've seen some shit. The other nurse had been in the OR as a trauma specialist for over 10 years. The anesthesiologist had done residency at a level 1 trauma center, or as we call them, knife and gun clubs. The surgeon was ex-army and averaged about 8 words and 2 facial expressions a week. None of us expected what was about to happen next. We got the lady off to sleep, put her into the stirrups, and I began washing off the rectal area. It was red and inflamed. A little bit of pus was seeping through, but it was all pretty standard. Her chart had noted she'd been injecting IV drugs through her perineum, so this was obviously an infection from dirty needles or bad drugs. But overall, it didn't seem to warrant her repeated cries of, "Oh Jesus, kill me now." The surgeon steps up with a scalpel, sinks just the tip in, and at the exact same moment, the patient had a muscle twitch in her diaphragm, and just like that, all hell broke loose. Unbeknownst to us, the infection had actually tunneled nearly a foot into her abdomen, creating a vast cavern full of pus, rotten tissue, and fecal matter that had seeped outside of her colon. This godforsaken mixture came rocketing out of that little incision like we were recreating the funeral scene from Jane Austen's Mafia. We all wear waterproof gowns, face masks, gloves, hats, the works, all of which were as helpful as rain boots against the fire hose. The bed was in the middle of the room, an easy 7 feet from nearest wall, but by the time we were done, I was still finding bits of rotten flesh pasted against the back wall. As the surgeon continued to advance his blade, the torrent just continued. The patient kept seizing against the ventilator, not uncommon in surgery, and with every muscle contraction, she shot more of this brackish, gray-brown fluid out onto the floor until, within minutes, it was seeping into the other nurse's shoes. I was nearly 12 feet away, jaw dropped open with my surgical mask, watching the second nurse dry heaving, and the surgeon on tiptoes to keep this stuff from soaking his socks any further. The smell hit them first. Oh god, I just threw up in my mask. The other nurse was out. She tore off her mask and sprinted out of the room, shoulders still heaving. Then it hit me, mouth still wide open, not able to believe the volume of fluid this woman's body contained. It was like getting a great big bite of the despair and apathy that permeated this woman's life. I couldn't fucking breathe. My lungs simply refused to pull any more of that stuff in. The anesthesiologist went down next, an ex-NCAA D1 tailback, his 6'2" frame shaking as he threw open the door to the OR suite in an attempt to get more air in, letting me glimpse the second nurse still throwing up in the sinks outside the door. Another geyser of pus splashed across the front of the surgeon. The YouTube clip of David at the dentist keeps playing in my head. Is this real life? In all operating rooms, everywhere in the world, regardless of socialized or privatized, secular or religious, big or small, there is one thing the same. Somewhere, there is a bottle of peppermint concentrate. Everyone in the department knows where it is, everyone knows what it is for, and everyone prays to their gods that they never have to use it. In times like this, we rub it on the inside of our masks to keep the outside smells at bay long enough to finish the procedure and shower off. I sprinted to our central supply, ripping open the drawer where this vial of ambrosia was kept, and was greeted by an empty fucking box. The bottle had been emptied and not replaced. Somewhere out there was a godless bastard who had used the last of the peppermint oil and not replaced a single fucking drop of it. To this day, if I figure out who it was, I'll kill them with my bare hands, but not before cramming their head up the colon of every last meth user I can find, just so we're even. I darted back into the room with the next best thing I could find, a vial of mastitol, which is an adhesive rub we use sometimes for bandaging. It's not as good as peppermint, but considering that over 1/3 of the floor was now thoroughly coated in what could easily be mistaken for a combination of bovine afterbirth and maple syrup. We were out of options. I started rubbing as much of the mask tool as I can get on the inside of my mask, just glad to be spelling anything except whatever slimy demon spawn we just cut out of this woman. The anesthesiologist grabbed the vial next, dousing the front of his mask in it, so we could stand next to his machines long enough to make sure this woman didn't die on the table. It wasn't until later that we realized that Mathwontmissyou can give you a mild high from huffing it like this. But in retrospect, that's probably what got us through. By this time, the smell had permeated out of our OR suite and down the 40-foot hallway to the front desk, where the other nurse still sat, eyes bloodshot and watery, clenching her stomach desperately. Our suite looked like the underground river of ooze from Ghostbusters 2, except dirty. Oh, so dirty. I stepped back into the OR suite, not wanting to leave the surgeon by himself in case he genuinely needed help. It was like one of those overly artistic representations of a zombie apocalypse you see on fan forums. Here's this one guy in blue surgical garb standing nearly ankle deep in lumps of dead tissue, fecal matter, and several liters of syrupy infection. He was performing surgery in the swamps of Dagobah. Except the swamps had just come out of this woman's ass, and there was no Yoda. He and I didn't say a word for the next 10 minutes as he scraped the inside of the abscess until all the dead tissue was out. The front of his gown was a gruesome mixture of brown and red. His eyes squinted against the stinging vapors originating directly in front of him. I finished my required paperwork as quickly as I could, helping him stuff the recently vacated opening full of gauze, taped this woman's buttocks closed, and hauled the dressing for as long as possible, woke her up, and immediately shipped off to the recovery ward. Until then, I'd only heard of alcohol showers. Turns out, 70% isopropyl alcohol is about the only thing that can even touch a scent like that once it's soaked into your skin. It takes 4 or 5 bottles to really get clean, but it's worth it. It's probably the only scenario I can honestly endorse drinking a little of it too. As we left the locker room, the surgeon and I looked at each other, and he said the only negative sentence I heard him utter in 2.5 years of working together. That was bad. The next morning, the entire department, a fairly large floor within the hospital, still smelled. The housekeepers told me later that it took them nearly an hour to suction up all the fluid and debris left behind. The OR suite itself was closed off and quarantined for 2 more days, just to let the smell finally clear out. I laugh now when I hear new recruits to healthcare talk about the worst thing they've seen. You ain't seen shit, kid. TLDR, don't shoot IV drugs into your taint. That deserves an upvote, and you deserve a freaking Medal of Honor. Isn't it weird that your story makes me want to be a doctor even more? It kind of is. Clearly, after reading the story, the majority of Redditors were floored by it, not just for what it contained, but for how it was told. So the next thing Reddit does, of course, is ask for shitty watercolor to paint it. Shitty Watercolor responds with an IOU. Regrettably, Mr. Shitty is currently unable to paint rectal explosions as he is painting a series of watercolors to mark the final descent of curiosity. Yours sincerely, Mr. Shitty. You see, while all of Reddit was enthralled by this tale of an infected exploding asshole, the Mars rover Curiosity was making its final descent back to Earth. How fucking serendipitous is it that this video that starts with a Star Wars reference somehow manages to circle back to actual real-life space travel? In any case, Shitty Watercolor would make good on this drawing 2 years later, receiving Bonsai Panda's seal of approval. Speaking of Bonsai Panda's Star Wars reference, Redditors also took this opportunity to try and come up with a name for this story. They recognized that this one would also be remembered among stories like the Jolly Rancher story, so they had to come up with a name for it where you just say it then you know what it is automatically. And actually, of all the suggestions, Swamps of Dagobah wasn't one of them, the closest being the Dagobah story. But some honorable mentions include Maple Syrup River, the Ass-splosion, and Zombie Butt Geyser. But throughout the rest of the thread, without anybody saying that this is what we were going to call the story, people just seemed to latch on to that one phrase, Swamps of Dagobah, because really it's just such a solid pull for what this is. They recognize that you could just say Swamps of Dagobah, and anyone who's familiar with the story knows you're not talking about Star Wars. And of course, with any story like this on Reddit, you had those who doubted its authenticity. And while obviously you couldn't verify something like this without a gross violation of privacy, but other medical professionals in the thread seemed to co-sign the idea that, oh yeah, this is a thing that happens. So what happened to the patient after? As far as Bonsai Panda knows, she survived. And not only that, the Swamps of Dagobah lady dipped without paying, or as Bonsai Panda put it, she dined and dashed. And I'm sure there's British people watching this that are like, yeah, and? So Bonsai Panda explains further. Healthcare financing is tricky, much in the way that Shelby Slayer is tricky. This particular individual was covered by Indian Health Services, which covers Native Americans. So normally we send the bill to them. But IHS requires registration, and she hadn't registered. And because you can't squeeze blood from a turnip, it doesn't matter how many delinquent notices you send someone, if they don't pay, and they don't have any money in the first place, there's not a lot you can do to them. So that lady got to spray her ass ectoplasm all over the hospital, mark her territory for who knows how long, and not even pay a dime. Sounds like a win to me. Seeing how much interest there was in this story, later that day, Bonsai Panda would do an AMA. In the initial post, Bonsai Panda gives more specific details about his work. I specialize in spine and orthopedics, trauma, and general surgeries, but have experience in pretty much every specialty. I've carried breasts in a Ziploc bag, seen a broken penis, it's a real thing, sawed off legs while the patient was awake, seen pus rocket out of rectums, plus lots of other cool stuff. He also stated that he wouldn't give away any information like locations that would compromise past patients or coworkers. He also said he wouldn't diagnose people in the comments, although there was at least one person who was not deterred by that warning. He also had to clarify that he is in fact a male nurse, because everyone seemed to assume he was a woman because he's a nurse. So in a lot of the thread we got some insight about Bonsai Panda's background. At some point he considered teaching before ultimately going into nursing as both of his parents had, and ultimately starting off working at the same hospital that they did. He hadn't gone to med school because he thought at first that it would be above his head, but after actually getting into the field, he began to reconsider it. Although he did have some concerns about knowing just how much depth you go into in med school. But of course, what most people wanted from this thread was just more crazy stories. And they absolutely did get a lot of crazy stories from Bonsai Panda. When asked about what his most nerve-wracking operating room experience was, he spoke of a young cliff diver who had burst 2 vertebrae and was hypothermic from the cold water. At the same time, the temporary surgeon that was brought in for this procedure was furious that the room was too warm to operate in. With the patient still awake and listening to everything, he began to yell at the rest of the staff until they got things in order. Ultimately, that surgeon was reported and banned from the hospital. Another incident he described was of a man with gangrene of the butt and testicles. A situation where his flesh was so rotten that one of his testicles was just out hanging loose. The strangest thing he's ever taken out of somebody? There's a few. Carrots stuck all the way in the bladder, not just once but twice, a man and a woman. I guess that's a more popular sounding implement than I realized. A needle stuck in a roll of fat. And a dildo stuck so far up someone's ass that they had to cut them open and, as he put it, milk it out by hand. And apparently the staff all took bets on what color it was gonna be. And when asked about what the saddest case he ever dealt with was, he told the story of a church camp bus that was full of kids and flipped onto its side. Several of the kids got their limbs caught under the windows. He worked on 2 sisters, one of which had her leg bone exposed. Some of the nurses who themselves had kids couldn't stop crying and just had to leave the room. But he stood by as the plastic surgeon stripped the dead tissue to prevent infection. Fortunately, the girls did survive, and in a post about their follow-ups, he laments one of the strange downsides of being in this field. One was a little worse off than the other, and she came back for several skin grafts, but both of them went home to their families within a few days. I was lucky enough to be in on her subsequent procedures. One of the unforeseen downsides to being in the OR is that we never get to see the outcome of our work. We do our part, and then the patient is gone. We never know the ending. It was pretty special to get to see her slowly heal and eventually leave us. Bonsai Panda shared a lot of stories in this thread. I'm not going to read all of them, so I definitely recommend if you're interested going and checking out the original thread. Bonsai Panda also took the opportunity to reflect on how working in this field can affect someone's mindset. In particular, one user asked if seeing all these crazy scenarios play out in front of them has made him more cautious in his own life. And he mentioned that in some ways it had the opposite effect, showing how resilient the human body can be. In particular, after being diagnosed with bone cancer, thankfully non-fatal, he decided to take up powerlifting, an interest that his posting history reveals that he has kept up with throughout the years. At this point, it's been about 8 years since Bonsai Panda's story Swamps of Dagobah has become a thing of legend. But much more recently, Vice had the chance to catch up with Bonsai Panda, whose name they identified as Kelly, and who they referred to as she, which I guess the name Kelly didn't help in that situation, to reflect on this old story. He mentions that although he didn't necessarily realize it at the time, it actually wound up being very therapeutic for him to share these stories in this way. And with this story becoming such a famous tale, he shared a little anecdote about it bleeding into his real life. My internet fame has had the same effects on my life as pretty much everyone else's. Not at all. Probably the closest thing to an IRL effect was when I was working at a university hospital in Seattle and overheard 2 new surgical residents discussing my Reddit story and trying to decide if it was real or not. Neither of them having any idea that the author was standing in the room behind them. That was the first time I realized just how many people were actually on Reddit and how far the story had spread. But anyway, that's the story of Swamps of Dagobah. Check out this meat. It looks exquisite, right? Nice and browned on the outside, but juicy and rare on the inside. The way a good steak ought to be cooked. Chop it up and fry with some peppers and onions, and you've got yourself some yummy tacos. What if I told you that this steak came from a human leg, and the guy whose leg it was chopped it up, cooked it, and fed it to his friends? This is the story of a Redditor named Incredibly Shiny Shart, the man who made tacos out of his own foot. Would you dine on human flesh if it were guaranteed that it was safe to eat and that it was ethically sourced? It's a moral question that a lot of people have wrestled with throughout time. Perhaps even more so now with the advent of lab-grown meat. See, me personally, I'm not that sure. I've always been a pretty adventurous eater and I'm kind of curious about it, but at the same time, I watched that movie, We Are What We Are. And this movie, spoiler alert, the cannibal family develops tremors from a disease called Kuru. I'm pretty sure you can only get that from eating brains, but at the same time, the type of hypochondriac that it's like I think every lump is cancer, so guaranteed if I ate human meat, I'd be like, oh my god, am I shaken? I don't know, I'd probably still eat it though. But regardless of what you or me would do about it, the Redditor Incredibly Shiny Shart had an inside joke with his friends for many years. They'd ask each other if they would try human flesh if it was ethical and safe, and they were always like, yeah, of course, no questions asked. They didn't even have to think about it. And then one day, such an opportunity would present itself. I was riding down a mountain road on Memorial Day, 45 miles an hour speed limit, with 1 truck and 1 car ahead of me. Ahead of me, a car coming the opposite direction was stopped and indicating they wanted to turn across the road to the fishing area to my right. They stayed stopped in the road as both the car and truck ahead of me passed. They did not move as I approached. I figured they saw me and they were waiting for me to pass. As I approached within 15 feet, they hit the gas and clipped the back of my bike. It locked up and I fishtailed and then flipped into the forest. I sat up and took off my helmet and saw the burning pain that was my foot. Although it remained attached, his foot was absolutely destroyed internally. Doctors were able to save his foot, but they also said that there is no way he was ever going to be able to walk on that foot again. So he was presented with an option. He could either keep the non-working foot or he could have it amputated. And if you remember back to my video about the guy who tried to crowdfund his foot amputation, you'll know that sometimes it's more difficult to live with a non-functioning foot than it is to simply have it removed. And after weighing his options, Incredibly Shiny Shart 2 came to that conclusion. So he opted to have the foot amputated, or actually more like the calf down. He posted the leg pre and post operation, which I can't show you on YouTube, but however, he also did post a picture of his nub signed as proof. And upon getting his foot amputated, he asked the doctor, "Can I keep it?" And in the case of amputations, it seems like people always seem to ask whether or not they can keep the body part. And for what I've seen, sometimes the doctor allows it and sometimes they don't. It's almost kind of arbitrary. I mean, the way I see it, it's your foot. You should be able to do whatever you want with it. And thankfully, Shart's doctor allowed him to keep the foot after signing some paperwork. So he puts it in a cooler and drives home with it. According to an interview he did with Vice, he didn't originally plan to eat it. I got back to my place and I froze it. I couldn't find a taxidermist who would take me seriously, and freeze drying was too expensive. It would have been $1,200 to freeze dry the thing. If I had the money, I would have done it. Eventually, I decided to cast it in plaster to use it as a doorstop, then capture a 3D rendering so I could make little keychains. When we got back to my house, I took the foot out and it was so gross, man. It was covered in blood and had iodine all over it. After I cleaned it off, I was pleasantly surprised by how well preserved it was. It's not like they preserved it in formaldehyde or anything, but when you think about beef, which can be dry aged for months, I suppose it makes sense. I had 4 friends with me at the time, and it was all surreal. We picked it up and were playing with it. It didn't seem like it was a foot, it just seemed like an object, not a piece of a person. There was no emotional connection. I could think, yep, that's my foot right there, but there wasn't some deep part of me that felt weirded out by it. In fact, that was the weirdest part, was that it wasn't weird. And here's where the gears start turning. He thinks back to that old joke they had about whether or not you would eat human flesh if it was ethical and safe. And he notices that parts of his foot have exposed muscle from the surgery. So he cuts out a big chunk and packs it away before making the plaster cast with the rest of the foot. He starts to call a bunch of his friends to see if they're down. 11 people in total. And out of those 11 people, 10 agreed. Not only that, it turns out that one of his friends is dating a professional chef. So he starts talking about his ideas with the chef, and eventually they come up with a recipe for foot fajitas. Here's the recipe screenshot if you want to, eat a foot or something, I guess. For some reason, the idea of specifically eating a foot grosses me out. It's like, ew, you walk around with that's dirty. But then, thinking about that, you gotta take a step back and be like, wait, once you're in for eating any part of a human being, it's kind of like, why you're bogged down in little details. It came from a person, and while you're eating it, you're looking at him in the eye. In any case, the chef marinates the meat overnight, and they make plans for the whole crew to come over and dine on foot the next day. So you gotta ask, how was it? How was the bitter taste of the feet? Well, one of his friends spit him out into a napkin and then apologized. And as for incredibly shiny Shart himself, when asked to rate it on a scale of 1 to 10, that is a fantastic question. On this scale, I would give it a solid 6.5, but keep in mind that I have had a lot of good food. So it's way better than a hot dog or a regular burger. Maybe equal with regular bacon, which is pretty decent, but nowhere near as good as butter-seared sea scallops, or rare sous vide tenderloin seared in grapeseed oil in a cast iron pan. And the next year, in a post in r/sous vide where he was eating some actual bison, he quipped that perhaps he should have cooked the foot sous vide. Ultimately though, the quality of the meal wasn't really the point. Although I do have to say, some of the pictures make it look really tasty. More so, this was a bonding experience between him and those closest to him. An experience that helped give him closure on his terrible life-changing accident. The outpouring of compassion and empathy I received from my friends and my loved ones really helped me take on the challenge of this big change in my life. So as taking care of this body part that took care of me for so long, I was paying homage to it and giving it a proper send-off. I have the ashes sitting in a jar on my girlfriend's altar in her living room, and I'll take it to my grave. It's part of me, and this experience is part of me too. Things worked out so damn well afterward. My life has gotten so much better. I left the town I was in and a job of 10 years that was killing me emotionally. I moved to another state. I have a way better job and I enjoy the hell out of it. I've met a woman who I've been with for over a year and a half now, and she's the best thing in my life. I'm so much happier now than I could conceive of being before, and it's because of this time where my life was threatened that I persevered through it. Eating my foot was a funny and weird and interesting way to move forward. Anyway, that's all for the story of the Redditor who ate his own foot. Gonorrhea, aka the clap. Gonorrhea is the subject of what is probably the most requested story for tales from the internet. What I'm talking about, of course, is the Reddit Jolly Rancher story, and I was gonna have a Jolly Rancher in my hand when I did this, but I forgot to buy him, so, I'm just gonna edit it into my hand, and I need to learn I need to learn how to use After Effects, because I can't do it that well. If you're not familiar with the Jolly Rancher story, it's the tale of a guy who believes he's putting delicious candy into his mouth during a sexual encounter, but it turns out that he's putting in quite the opposite of a delicious candy. And this story feels like one of those chain letters, like the lobster sex story I covered in an earlier video. Which means that clearly it sets off my bullshit detector a little bit, but it also means that we have the chance to look at this story and tell whether or not it's fact or fiction. But without further ado, let's take a look at the Reddit Jolly Rancher story. This is from a thread entitled Reddit, what's the grossest / nastiest thing that's happened to you in a sexual encounter? I'll go first, and we don't care what he said first, because this isn't clearly the classic story that came out of this thread. A user named Rival the Creator says, nothing tops the Jolly Rancher story. Steve and his girlfriend Samantha went off to college in August, and right there, the fact that it's like named as he's like this third-party narrator kind of tells me this is an old story that he read off a chain letter or some shit. She went to Florida State, he went to Penn, so we got distance in this relationship. So she decides to fly to PA to visit him. He was really happy to see her, so he decided to give her some oral action. He had done this numerous times before, and he always enjoyed doing it, but for some reason this time, she smelled really horrible, and she tasted even worse. He didn't want to offend her though, because he hadn't seen her in months. This is the kind of trouble people will get themselves into just because they want to avoid a little bit of social discomfort. You know, you can't just be like, hey, you know, something smells and tastes not right. You can't just be like, hey, you want to, like, you know, wash up a little bit or tell me what's going on here. No, you just gotta power through the fucking dead body stench and just make it happen. Can't upset anybody. Can't upset anybody. And rather than say anything, Steve had a brilliant solution for this. He put a Jolly Rancher in his mouth to cover it up. Even though it didn't do much to help because it's a fucking Jolly Rancher, not a mint of any kind, it's just candy, which by the way, you probably should never ever ever fucking do in this kind of a situation, regardless of what kind of stenches or smells or like things you're covering up, because whatever the situation is, you're just gonna make it worse. Like, they got a whole fucking ecosystem going on down there, and you're just gonna fuck up the whole ecosystem by introducing sugar and things that'll like make bacteria happy. You know, don't bring candy down there. She's gonna be like shooting out fucking pearls, getting some kind of a yeast infection or something. It's bad news. Don't do these things. In the course of eating her out, he accidentally pushed the candy inside of her and stuck a finger in to grab it out. He took it out and put it back in his mouth and bit it. Who bites a Jolly Rancher? Only it wasn't the Jolly Rancher. It was a nodule of gonorrhea. Holy shit, what the fuck is a nodule of gonorrhea? As in, the blister-like structure that gonorrhea makes, filled with diseased pus, was the size of a fucking Jolly Rancher, and the poor guy bit it. I guess it was really dark in the room. He freaked out and started vomiting all over the place when it exploded in his mouth. He demanded to know what was going on. Turns out she had cheated on him at the club, like, the first week of college, and fucked some random guy, and the stupid bitch had no clue what was wrong with her. She noticed a strange smell, though, and now Steve is freaking out that he has gonorrhea of the mouth and God knows what else. Alright, so let's analyze the points of this story and figure out whether or not the infamous, the famous, highly requested Jolly Rancher story is legitimate, if it's possible, if this can happen. The most important part of this is obviously for us to find out what is a nodule of gonorrhea. Let's Google that shit. Oh my oh shit, I made myself actually almost puke by trying to do fake pukes. Oh my, like seriously, my eyes are watering. But no, that's not actually a nodule of gonorrhea, it's a strawberry. It is a strawberry covered with melted Jolly Rancher. Supposedly, it's a much more delicious way to eat a strawberry. In fact, the more I search about gonorrhea, the more it seems like a nodule of gonorrhea isn't an actual thing that happens. Like, you'll get all kinds of, like, pus. The closest thing that it seems like might be a symptom, and granted, I'm not a doctor, I'm just a guy with fucking Google, but it seems like the nodule of gonorrhea isn't a thing. Perhaps maybe you have like some kind of pus that gets old and kind of like forms a thing of harder pus, but I don't know if that's a thing. And it's certainly, if that were a thing, wouldn't resemble a Jolly Rancher in any way. Like, I'm sure you've had, if not a Jolly Rancher, at least some kind of hard candy. At no point does it ever turn to something that could possibly be mistaken for like a fleshy nodule of any kind. It's crunchy. If you pull something that's crunchy out of a person, it's bad news. You know it's bad news, even in the heat of a moment, even with your smelly girlfriend that you haven't seen in a long time. I'm also going to call bullshit on I don't know what was wrong. I noticed it smelled, but you know, I didn't think anything of it. Because a person that has this disease, they should be, especially if they've let it go on for so long, that, you know, it's forming masses, like this unprecedented symptom, that they should be in fucking agonizing pain. Like, this isn't just like a little like, oh, something smells. No, like, you're having like severe pain throughout your fucking body. So that's calling bullshit part 2. So in conclusion, I think the famous Reddit Jolly Rancher story, while a fun, gross tale, I don't necessarily think it holds up to the way reality actually works. And I think it might actually be a much older story than the Reddit post. And if I actually do have any doctors watching this, I imagine that my channel, it attracts the highest of real-world professionals here. If you can comment on the possibilities of gonorrhea nodules, please let me know, because that... at some point, I was feeling like my Google Foo was just failing, but I'm starting to think that's just not a real thing.
On August 24th, 1986, Paul Morgan's life was forever changed. He was in an accident which left him paralyzed. Paul and several of his friends had been out boating that day. They were on their way home, pulling the boat on a trailer behind the truck. Paul fell out of the back of the truck and was run over by the boat trailer they were towing. He spent 3 months in and out of hospitals. The injury has resulted in several back surgeries, as well as having a kidney removed. Paul's lifestyle changed dramatically after the accident. After much pain and rehabilitation, he has regained limited walking ability with the help of leg braces. This was how Paul Morgan would describe the incident that would alter the course of his life forever. And here's the thing, this happened all the way back in 1986, and medical technology has progressed a lot since then. Although the doctors did what they could do at the time, Paul knew that modern procedures could drastically improve the quality of his life. But the thing about these new procedures is they would require an amputation that Paul's insurance provider didn't feel was necessary. But Paul was no quitter. He hatched a plan. Paul's plan was to crowdfund the removal of his feet and reward the donors with a live stream of the amputation of his feet using a homemade guillotine. Ladies and gentlemen, this is the story of cutoffmyfeet.com. The American healthcare system is a disaster. We pay way too much money to insurance companies, and when you actually need to use the insurance companies, they do everything they possibly can to make sure that you don't get what you paid for. And that's even if you have insurance, otherwise people seem to be increasingly turning to GoFundMe to have other people pay their medical bills. But GoFundMe has only even been around since 2010, and it's been much more recent that it became socially acceptable to use it in that way. But that doesn't mean that this whole thing started with them. Enter Paul Freck Morgan. In 2001, Paul created a website called cutoffmyfeet.com where he proposed his plan to cut off his feet. And although this sounds like this setup for some kind of body integrity identity disorder based manga, this actually wasn't based on any kind of deep-seated compulsion that he had, rather some kind of medical necessity. He did it out of a very real medical concern that would improve the quality of his life. After the boating accident that I spoke about at the beginning of the video, Paul became paralyzed beneath his knees. Here's how he described the condition. Paul's accident partially severed the T12 in his spinal cord. This has resulted in partial paralysis from the waist down. Above the knees, Paul has working quadriceps, adductors, abductors, and medial hamstrings. The paralysis increases below the knees, leading to complete paralysis of the feet. He has feeling all the way to his ankles on the front side of his legs, and a dull sensation on the back side of his legs. He has no feeling or movement below the ankles. A procedure was performed to salvage what they could of his movement, but it didn't go perfectly. During the initial surgery, when the spinal injury occurred, which was 2 days after the accident, the thoracic 11 lumbar 1 were fused by Harrington rods. A year later, another surgery was needed to remove the Harrington rods. However, there was a piece of wire left in my back for no apparent reason. It showed up in the x-ray like a wire in a bread tie. There was also a piece of bone for my right pelvis used in the fusion of the T11 and T12L1 vertebrae. Paul was a bit unsatisfied with the results of his procedure, but there was little that he could do at the time. But the years would go by and medical technology would improve, and in 2001, Paul hatched a plan with his buddies to help improve his life. The idea. Paul Morgan is a man who desperately wants to lead a normal life again. When the accident first happened, the technology was not available for that to happen. While the technology is now available for Paul to lead a better life, the financial burden would be much more than he could afford. Since Paul is on Medicare/Medicaid, his insurance will not cover the amputation and new prosthetics because it is not deemed a necessary procedure. Paul also receives medical disability, and his Medicare plan does not even cover the cost of his catheter bag. Paul doesn't want to fight a no-win battle with the insurance and medical communities in the United States. Paul is using this event as a chance to speak out against the lack of care in the medical field and the insurance industry. He strongly believes that this could make great strides in the much-needed insurance and medical reform in the United States. This amputation is simply Paul's way of saying that even though corporate America has refused him, he will get his new prosthetics and improve his quality of life. Paul and his friend, Kevin Nicholson, came up with the idea to charge internet access and cut off Paul's feed on the internet. By charging a small fee for the webcam access, Paul will raise the money he needs for the operations, prosthetics, and rehabilitation. The stream was scheduled to go down on September 19th of 2001, and people could gain access by paying $20. And in addition to webcam access, they would also get exclusive updates from Paul, as well as be entered in a contest to be able to see the amputation live and in person. The contest was won by Jared Pallone of Pompano Beach, Florida. Congratulations, Jared. And don't worry, after getting his feet cut off, Paul wasn't just gonna hop around on stumps and go, what are we gonna do now? He had a plan. A plan that was outlined in part in his FAQ section. Aren't you worried about losing too much blood or about bleeding to death? I plan on having medical professionals on location to stop the bleeding. We will also be using a Dr. Bovie machine to cauterize the legs. This is the same type of machine that is used in hospitals during amputations. What are you going to do with your feet after you cut them off? Would you consider an auction? I'm not sure if that's legal. In our initial planning, we had talked about purchasing human legs or a cadaver to test the blade of the guillotine. Unfortunately, it's illegal, a federal crime, to buy or sell bodies or body parts. So, since an auction is not an option, but I like the idea, I guess I'd like to have my legs frozen. Then maybe one day medical science will find a way to let me use them again. Are you insane? No, I am not insane. This is something that I thought through very carefully, but for all of you who still doubt, I plan to have a full psychiatric evaluation done to prove that I'm completely sane. Paul's website would spread mostly by word of mouth until that July, when he called into the Howard Stern show. Although I was unable to find a recording of the episode, essentially he just outlined the whole process, what his plan was, and mentioned that he would need $150,000 to make this all come true. And from that point on, the website exploded, and this was amplified even further by mainstream media coverage. He even managed to pick up some classy new advertisers on his website, and thus the construction of his homemade guillotine began. But all this attention would be a bit of a mixed blessing, as shortly after his call into the Howard Stern show, he would receive contact from the Mississippi Attorney General's office. A spokeswoman for Mississippi Attorney General Mike Moore said state officials had been in touch with Morgan's lawyer about the matter. We have heard about this, and we have contacted his attorney because we are concerned, said Nancy East, Moore's spokeswoman. East said the state had offered to have Morgan evaluated by a surgeon in Jackson, the state capital, if Morgan agreed not to go ahead with the amputation. East said the internet amputation could violate a number of state laws, including a mayhem statute and laws protecting consumers from fraud. But despite these legal concerns, Paul decided to go forward with his original plan. Albeit he did delay it to Halloween, and then November 30th, and then eventually January 5th. The biggest holdup being that he just wasn't making the money that he thought he was gonna make. Despite the fact that his site was getting tens of thousands of visitors now, he only got about 20 people to sign up for the live stream. Not even enough to cover the cost of production, let alone all of his medical bills. And that's definitely a bit of a sign of the times. I mean, if you think about it, if this happened today, it would probably go viral instantly. If he set up a GoFundMe, he would probably reach that $150,000 goal instantly. And legal considerations aside, if the stream were to happen, he would probably make money hand over fist. But in 2001, that infrastructure simply wasn't there. Paul would wind up missing the January 5th date as well and calling into the Stern Show one more time, this time to explain what happened. He would also make one more update to his website. I know many of you have been looking forward to the guillotine amputation of my feet on January 5th. However, these are now the existing conditions. The upside: I have secured a production crew, EMT services, lighting, camera crews, director, live band, the video and DVD production, lighting, location, production manager, and, oh yes, the guillotine. The downside: corporate lawyers have caused me to lose several members of the crew, the satellite truck, and the initially interested investors who were covering the production costs of the amputation event. This being the case, the amputation of my feet by guillotine is postponed until the production money for the event has been secured. Many of you wonder why I am not using the sign-up money to pay for the costs. The money paid for memberships is an escrow until after I perform the amputation. So, I am hoping to find an interested investor to help me get this amputation underway. If you're interested in financing the production costs of the event, I would love to talk to you. Please email me at freck@cutoffmyfeet.com. Paul Freck Morgan. Ultimately, this was the last update on Paul's website, and the stream would never happen. CutOffMyFeet.com would expire later that year, and Paul Morgan would seemingly disappear from the internet entirely. And that seems to be where the story ends now. But if you know what happened to Paul, if he ever cut off his feet or what happened to him, please let me know. I would love to find out what happened to him and have an update for you guys.
This man spent tens of thousands of dollars on plastic surgery to look like, you probably already guessed it because he looks so much like him, David Beckham. You know, if David Beckham was a Pidgeotto. Meet Jack Johnson, not to be confused with the singer-songwriter, a man whose plastic surgery story has many twists and turns, treating his facial features like an RPG custom character spec slider. For today's episode of Tales from the Internet, we'll be looking at Jack's several year-long journey. I've always thought that people judge those who get plastic surgery a little bit harshly. To me, there's very little that distinguishes it from just extreme body mods. At the same time though, there are those who allow plastic surgery to consume them, never feeling quite satisfied with what they've got, always chasing the thing that'll bring them the perfection they seek and always falling short of that goal. Such is the tale of one Jack Johnson. He first comes to internet fame at the ripe age of 19 years old, in September of 2016. At the time, several outlets reported on the story of the teen from Nottingham who had spent prices ranging from £15,000 to £20,000 on cosmetic procedures since the age of 17 to look like David Beckham, and who quite obviously looked nothing like David Beckham. As some pointed out, he more closely resembled a white Kim Jong-un than David Beckham. In fact, if you look at the before pictures, I feel like he kinda looked more like David Beckham before he got any work done. The procedures at this point included teeth veneers, lip fillers, cheek fillers, eyebrow lift, Botox in his forehead, and tan injections. I didn't even know tan injections were a thing, but apparently there's some people who go even further with it. He also had several more procedures planned for the future, as well as copying David Beckham's tattoos. He also claimed to change his hair whenever Beckham did. This way he would always look as close to him as possible. And while Beckham did in fact rock a Pidgeotto cut for a while, the thing is, Jack has a very pronounced widow's peak. It would keep him from ever matching it entirely, which is why he had stated that he was going to go to Poland to get a hair transplant. And then of course, there's the matter of the physique. David Beckham, who has spent most of his adult life as an athlete at the highest levels, has an extremely chiseled physique. Jack, on the other hand, does not. But Jack hoped to address this with gastric bypass surgery. So how did all this get started anyway? The fixation on Beckham supposedly begins in 2008. It was at this time that an 11-year-old Jack attended Wimbledon with his school on a class trip. During the trip, he happened to see David Beckham out with his son Brooklyn. For that moment, he knew what he had to do. I've always wanted to look like him because there isn't a person on this planet who can say he is ugly. Jack was actually not a fan of soccer at all. He was just attracted to David Beckham's celebrity lifestyle, which was corroborated by comments by his older brother Aaron. Outspoken Aaron from Nottingham exclusively revealed, he is a twat. He really is. He wants to be famous and wants to be the next star. I know it is harsh, but I am just being honest. He has gone over the top. There is no stopping him. He needs to calm it down because he thinks he is a law to himself. He is in cloud cuckoo land. And although the brother's comments seem a bit harsh, Jack's own comments make it seem like, this is kind of in line with the truth of it. I want to be on the friends list of Nicki Minaj, Beyonce, Drake, and Katie Price. One day, Simon Cowell will be picking up the phone to me. And as it turns out, that week the fame he was looking for came to him, although perhaps for unexpected reasons. So, Jack was unemployed at the time. So how was he paying for all of this? According to the most common media narrative, he was on government benefits and using his welfare on plastic surgery, instead of, the source of necessities it's supposed to be for. So there you go, as sensationalistic as a story already is that you got this guy getting plastic surgery to look like David Beckham and he looks like nothing like David Beckham. On top of that, now you can say, hey, this guy, he's spending your tax money to look like this. It culminates in an interview on the show This Morning, which shines a bit more light on how Jack actually is. And it's pretty interesting. Like, knowing that this guy is definitely seeking fame, you might expect him to be someone who's, just kind of trolling for attention. But in the interview, he actually does come across surprisingly self-aware. Like, he knows he doesn't look like David Beckham.
Like, obviously, I know I don't look like him, you know what I mean? I'm not that stupid.
And he knows he's not in good shape.
Obviously, I'm not slim like him, I ain't got the six-pack, but I do want a gastric band.
Which, by the way, the doctors did reject his application for a gastric band. One of the more poignant moments of the interview is when he's asked what happens when eventually he does reach his goal of looking like David Beckham.
Do you ever worry that after doing all of this, spending all this money, putting your health at risk, that actually maybe you should just work on you and learning to really love the person that you are now?
I know what you mean, but not really. I'm happy looking like David Beckham, being like David Beckham. I want his lifestyle. You
can hear the desperation in his voice, as if he's thought about this question before. And now it sounds like he's trying to convince himself that this is what will make everything right. And it kind of makes you feel for the dude a bit. Because even if it's not as extreme, there's probably been some moment where you thought, oh, if only I had this specific thing turn out a certain way, everything would be fine in my life. And it's just never really like that. Eventually they get to the burning controversy though, the benefits.
You're unemployed, you're spending your benefits on...
That's the thing, I just want to confirm, I ain't spent one bit of my money on my benefits. I've took out loans and I'm in debt.
But how are you going to pay that back?
You could tell by his immediate reaction that he was annoyed by the claim that he was funding all this with government benefits. At that point, he was already £19,000 in debt, and needed by his estimate $30,000 more to finish the job. Which honestly, it's wild to me that an unemployed 19-year-old can be given loans like this. And the earliest reporting on him did mention that he funded all this with loans. But as outlets latched onto the benefits thing more, that narrative started to disappear. And it was often paired with political commentators who were like, hey, you see this? This is why we gotta cut back on those benefits. Granted, he did have some wild ideas on what should be covered by the NHS, such as lip fillers. Incredibly, the teenager also wants some plastic surgery procedures like lip fillers to be free on the NHS. He added, I think lip fillers should be on the NHS. I've had arguments about this with people on the internet. I understand there are other things out there on the NHS that are important. I understand, for example, people who want a baby should have IVF treatment on the NHS, but other people need work on their lips. Not to mention he would in fact get into it with people online over the benefits. When one Twitter user questioned why Jack had been able to splash his benefits on beauty treatments, he replied, "Because I'm fabulous." A few months later though, Jack would come clean with a startling admission. It was all just a stunt. He never spent that money, he was never on benefits, never wanted to look like David Beckham, and his friends and family were all in on it. It was all just a stunt so he could appear on This Morning. He came clean to everything in a Facebook post saying that he just wanted to be liked, but ultimately the sudden fame made everything worse. Fame doesn't solve your problem. It actually made my problems worse. Don't get me wrong, it's amazing having free things sent to you, or getting invited to celebrity events, or being paped, but behind the cameras, I was living in a fantasy. But ultimately, this all just makes what happens next even more confusing. He would spend a significant amount of time afterwards finding himself, and here's what he found. In June of 2018, 2 years after his original rise to infamy, and 1 year after the admission that it was all fake, he's back at it again. Okay, yeah, he didn't want to look like David Beckham after all. Now, he wanted to look like David Beckham's son, Brooklyn Beckham. David is obviously very attractive, but he's getting older now and I want a younger, fresher look. Brooklyn is more in the limelight, and now when I go to my surgeon or beauty therapist, I take a picture of him. He commented that looking back on that TV interview, he thought he looked like Mr. Potato Head, but he was happy with his current look, which cost him 9,000 pounds more, and involved thread facelifts, derma rollers, and something called vampire facials. Apparently they extract blood from your arm and put that blood into your face. Cause you know, the arm is where you get that real good blood. No wonder they grew that one guy a new wiener on it. Still, tens of thousands of pounds in debt, Jack was homeless, couch surfing, and having his lifestyle funded entirely by 5 sugar daddies. Sugar daddies who also treated him to fancy meals and designer bags. I don't know, to me 5 guys seems like it might be a bit much to handle. But he clarifies, I don't have to do anything intimate with them. I just go out for luxury dinners and attend exclusive events by their side. It's a simple transaction. They're not really my friends. Despite how sad that sounds, he asserted that he was 100% happy, and that everyone who thought otherwise was jealous or a hater. When I tell people what I do, they always have bad opinions. But as sugar babies are the ones getting driven around in amazing cars. People want to moan, let them, because I'm the one who's winning. A year later, things would take an even more unexpected turn. It was in February of 2019 that Jack would come to another realization. He didn't want to look like Brooklyn Beckham. Now, he wanted to look like Victoria Beckham. And you won't believe how he came to this realization. She said, when I was 8, I was watching Jerry Springer's show and saw a transgender woman on there who had a sex change. So from there on, I knew one day I'm going to have the operation. Everyone knows I'm transgender and want to look like Victoria Beckham now in my hometown. And some people ain't so nice, but I don't care, because I have my happy ever after now. And also at this point, Jack, who had stated his intention to have his name legally changed to Victoria, had fully embraced his reputation as a person with the British public footing his bill. Altogether, it's going to cost the taxpayers about £18,000 for my sex change and facelift. Jack's family was claimed to be supportive, with his sister graciously offering to pay for his boob job, and his mother previously unhappy with his choice to look like David Beckham, knowing that this was his truth all along. And with this revelation, there's probably some of you watching this who are like, hey, it's kind of messed up that you spent this whole video misgendering and dead-naming this person. Well, for those of you thinking that, you're gonna like the next part even less. But at this point, you might have guessed where this is going. Yeah, that too was a publicity stunt. There was no sex change, no Victoria Beckham, no memories of Jerry Springer, and Jack would make the news one last time in March of 2020, with what he really wanted now. A new set of veneers to look like David Beckham once again, paid for by the NHS. And he wanted the NHS to pay for it because, as he said, people without legs get new legs. At this point, he was calling himself the Benefits King. And it's more over the top than ever. It's like he's fully taken on this wrestling heel style persona. He talks about how much better life is on benefits than working a job. How he just spent thousands of pounds on clothes and a new Louis Vuitton bag. How he's addicted to plastic surgery and his dream surgery is to get 4 ribs removed. And since the NHS had refused his veneers, he opened up an ultimately unsuccessful GoFundMe for the public to pay for his veneers, specifically to have this procedure done at a Turkish clinic known as the Comfort Zone. And he wraps up this final public spectacle with these comments. Jack also said that he is known for being the guy who spends thousands to look like David Beckham and receives hateful phone calls and once had his windows put through. When asked if he would ever stop claiming benefits, Jack said, "I will always claim benefits. I'm, after all, the benefit king." I can't help but think to that moment in 2017 when he made that Facebook post admitting that it was all just a stunt. I can't help but think that that was some kind of turning point. Perhaps the story of him getting all that plastic surgery on taxpayer money was true, and maybe he just made that post to get rid of some of the heat and it didn't quite work out. Or maybe that post was the only time he was really telling the truth. But then, since that post kind of went under the radar, maybe he felt that there was simply no shaking the reputation he had for himself now, so he might as well double down. If that's the case, there never seemed to be any real payoff for him. Some of the articles about him mention an agent and TV deals being in the works, but none of these ever came to fruition. If that's the case, it makes me think that perhaps each of these stunts that he did about a year apart, maybe those were pushes to try and make a deal happen, but none of the projects he envisioned for this character that he created ever really materialized. It's a story that's very clearly fraught with lies, but at the same time, in some parts of it, it's kind of hard to tell where the truth begins and the lies end. But in any case, that's the story of the Benefits King. Vertical integration is a concept in business in which a company owns multiple stages of production in order to reduce costs, maximize profits, and streamline the overall operation. For example, Apple manufactures their own hardware. They develop their own software that's then sold through their own stores. I sell t-shirts. Maybe I could screen print my own t-shirts and buy a sweatshop somewhere in Asia and have my clothes sewn together by children. I don't do that, but I could. What if your business was, I don't know, selling human body parts? It would be pretty convenient then to also own a funeral home. Get a nice stock of dead bodies. Well, that's exactly the idea that Megan Hess, an entrepreneur in Colorado, had. But as she soon learned, things can get a little messy when dealing with human remains. So for today's episode, let's talk about the funeral home owner that sold her customers body parts without their consent. Personally, I don't really care what happens to my dead body after I die. I have no use for it anymore. For all I care, you can tie me to the back of a truck and drag me around like Big Boss Man did to the Big Show's father. I realize though that I'm not normal in this regard. So when weird stuff starts happening to people's dead family members' remains, they kind of feel some type of way. So when you die, you got a few options. Among them, you can get buried, you can get cremated, maybe you donate your organs. To tell this story, it's a bit important to distinguish though between organ donations and donating your body to science and research or whatever. You got that organ donation checkbox on the back of your ID. My mother always told me not to check that off because then if you get into an accident, they let you die so they can take your organs. I don't know if that's true, but I feel like if it was true, they wouldn't tell you anyway, so... Regardless, organ donation is heavily regulated in the US. Selling organs for transplants is super illegal, and arrangements for transplants can't be made by for-profit organizations. They must be done by a charity that's registered with the government. Body parts that are sold not for transplants, but say research or educational purposes or things like that, much less regulated. In fact, in the US, there are no federal laws governing this, and very few state laws, and people do make a pretty penny off of this. But we'll get into the exact prices later. I think mostly the context that we've heard about donating your body to science is in kind of a joke context. Like, oh hey, you got a stupid brain there. Scientists should take your brain and study how stupid your brain is. So we know how your stupid brain works, we have a better understanding of what it's like to be stupid. The reality though, it's not so much like that. The reality of it is actually kinda sad. You see, whether you're having regular burial or cremation, dealing with the remains of a deceased family member is really expensive, cost prohibitive for some people. And that sometimes is where they wind up in a business called a body broker. It sounds like something out of Shadowrun. Body brokers are mostly for-profit companies that'll give you low-cost or even free cremations in exchange for being allowed to receive the body as a donation. What a lot of people don't realize though, especially because of the use of the term donation, the body isn't merely being given away for research. but rather the body is sold for a lot of money, often chopped up piece by piece. Very lucrative business, especially if you have a way to guarantee the flow of fresh bodies. For example, say if one were to run a body broker out of a funeral home. In 2017, Reuters did an investigation into the shady side of the body broker business. A lot of horrors were uncovered, like the story of a professionally decapitated woman found in the woods. Shells of HIV-infected heads stacked up among thousands of other body parts. Seminars involving cadavers in hotel ballrooms. And their investigation found that only one such facility, a joint body broker / funeral home, existed in the US. The Sunset Mesa Funeral Directors and Donor Services in Montrose, Colorado, owned by Megan Hess, who is in business with her parents, Shirley and Alan Koch. The operation begins in 2006, and pretty quickly all kinds of deceptions can be found. For example, they had these pamphlets for donor services that read, "Be a hero, be an organ donor." Now, technically, I guess, if you're donating your body for research or education or whatever, it is kind of a heroic thing in a sense. I mean, research does save lives, they do have to figure this stuff out somehow, and the future surgeons of the world do need ways to train. But that's clearly not what's being implied by these pamphlets. You get handed one of these things and you think, oh, I'm gonna die, my kidney is gonna save a kid's life. And on the now defunct website for this company, the deception was even more overt, with a splash page talking about life-saving organ transplants and how many people die waiting for a transplant, and linking to a legitimate but completely unrelated charity that actually does facilitate organ donations, Donate Life Colorado. In a later version of the website, the link to Donate Life Colorado is removed, but the statistics about organ transplants would remain, just a blurb added under Megan's portrait that says, "Without donation, there is no research. Without research, there is no cure." So at least now there's some attempt to give a real idea of what the business is about, even though it's still intentionally misleading. Then there's the issue of the fake qualifications. On her website, Megan claimed to have a doctorate in mortuary science, and in her office she proudly displayed her diploma, a doctorate of funeral services from the University of Mortuary Science. But there's no such degree as Doctor of Funeral Services, and there's no institution called the University of Mortuary Science. When she was questioned about this, all references to it were removed from the website. Ultimately, though, that didn't really matter since no degree was actually required to do this to begin with. Interviews with former employees, though, would reveal more damning insights. For example, there was former employee Carrie Escher. Carrie had mentioned conversations with Shirley Koch, who once again was Hess's mother who worked at the funeral home. She had bragged about all the gold teeth that she had pulled from dead bodies, and even showed her the collection of dead people's gold teeth. And that was just a part of the collection. You see, she had sold a bunch of the teeth the year prior, and she bragged about having used that money to take the family out to Disneyland. But believe it or not, a funeral director removing gold from dead people's mouths is not illegal in most states, including Colorado. Another former employee, Jennifer Henderson, told Reuters a similar story in which Hess bragged about making 40 grand in a month selling bodies. She would make similar brags often, and note that none of the employees that were interviewed had anything to do with the body broker business. They were all on the funeral home side of things, but they just couldn't help but brag about all the money they were making. So why was this so profitable? Let's take a look at how the prices break down. A price quote Hess sent to an Arizona medical training lab in 2016 offered torsos for $1,000 each. A pelvis with upper legs went for $1,200, heads for $500, a knee for $250, and a foot for $125, according to a 2013 donor services price list reviewed by Reuters. These transactions would allegedly be done through Hotmail, which sounds incredibly believable based off of a single glance at this woman. That's a Hotmail haircut if I've ever seen one. But of course, it's not illegal to have 80s hair, and once again, it's not illegal to make money selling dead people's body parts. What is illegal, though, is to sell the parts of people who did not consent to having their parts sold. And with an unusually high number of complaints regarding suspicious remains being given to people, as well as information garnered from the Reuters interviews, the FBI began to take a look into Hess and her operation. Complaints often revolved around cremated remains received by the families being suspicious. For example, one family was initially told they had lost the remains of their loved one. Eventually, the remains were found, but the family received what they believed to be an unusually light amount of ashes, as well as pieces of a watch, rivets, and a zipper, none of which the deceased was wearing when brought to the funeral home. Perhaps the most damning case, though, is one in which the family actually had their loved one's ashes tested, and they were told that these were not actually ashes. Rather, they had been given a jar of concrete. And in February of 2008, the funeral home would be shut down by the FBI. At the time, not for any of these specific complaints, but because over the course of their investigation, they had found that Hess had not been keeping the cremation and final disposition records that were required by law. Additionally, they had also found that they had disposed of bodies without the proper permits. Note though that in the course of the investigation, state investigators had found bags of dried concrete on the facility. News of what was going on with this funeral home began to spread, and any family who had any dealing with them was quickly struck with the reality of what had been going on. In a piece by IBH Fife for the Colorado Sun, she documents her experience with the funeral home. When her father died, she went there simply because it was the cheapest place to get a cremation. And like others, when she received the cremated remains, she was struck by how light they seemed. At the time though, she just thought maybe that's just how it is. She wasn't really familiar with what it's like to hold a cremated body. But after the news breaks, she starts to look into local online groups and see what people are saying about it. People talking about bodies being sold all over the world, Megan chopping up bodies in the back room with tools from Home Depot. All she's thinking about what might have happened to her father, and then she gets a call from the FBI. The agent gave me the news. Suspecting it is one thing, hearing the details is another. They said she cut him up in the back room of the funeral home, then sold his head, his torso, his arms, his legs below the knees. The only part of him that she didn't sell was his thighs. She cut his frail old body to pieces and pocketed the money. Similar experiences would be recounted by several people interviewed by Sam Tabachnik of the Denver Post. People holding urns of fake ashes, being told by the FBI that their loved ones' bodies were sold against their will, all seeking justice against the people who deceived them and desecrated their families' bodies. Yet Judy Kressler, who after her father died of lung cancer, agreed to donate some of his body for cancer research. She learned that instead of the donation she had agreed to, his whole body was plastinated and sent to Saudi Arabia. Plastination, if you don't know what that means, it's a way of preserving anatomical specimens. Think like the Body Worlds exhibit. So what was actually in the urn that she had received? After getting an analysis done, it turned out that she was holding a mix of some unknown person's ashes and burnt garbage. It wouldn't be until 2 years later though, in 2020, that Hess and her mother were arrested. Although investigators know that they were alleged to have sold body parts when it was unauthorized, and that when it was authorized they sold more than what was agreed to, the official charges wound up being 6 counts of mail fraud and 3 counts of transporting hazardous materials. The reason for this being that some of the body parts they sold were infected with hepatitis and HIV when they had certified that they were disease-free. So essentially, this was all happening more because the people buying the body parts were getting ripped off. In July of 2022, Hess and Koch would go to trial, revealing some of the inner workings of how they would prey on desperate people, with a general callousness towards the whole thing. For example, you got this one 2014 exchange between Hess and a potential buyer. Meeting with Hospice on the 4th, opening the floodgates of donors, Hess wrote to a prospective body part buyer in 2014. They have 4 or 5 deaths a day. Get ready. How about a deal on full embalmed spines? $950?
I'd buy that for $1.
Both Hess and Koch originally pleaded not guilty. Ultimately though, they would change to guilty pleas in exchange for reduced sentences and some of the charges being dropped. As of now, Hess is looking at as many as 20 years but as low as 2 years. A result that is extremely dissatisfactory for a lot of the families affected. The families noted a lack of remorse on their part and an unwillingness to take responsibility for their actions. And they also noted the unreputable sorts of places that the bodies wound up at. For example, one of the facilities that a body was sent to got caught thawing out the body in the parking lot with a garden hose. Ultimately, it seems unlikely that the families are actually going to get the result they would like from this, but sentencing as of now is set for November 7th, so we'll see what happens. But anyway, that's all for now. If you like this video, check out my video about the Tumblr witch who sold stolen human bones to do magic with. I'm out.